All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Appreciate everyone being here, those in person and those also with us online. This will most likely be our last freight and logistics meeting, public meeting. We'll probably be sending out a report electronically for a vote, but other than that, this will be our last public meeting. So I want to take this opportunity to thank the members of the commission that's been with us for the last 2 years. Traveling the state and dealing with COVID and all the other things we've had to deal with this year. And I want to especially thank our co-chairman, Chairman Beach. He's just been an asset to transportation for over a decade now in Georgia through being on the DOT board, Greta, and serving as chairman of transportation in the Senate. And I've enjoyed working with him for the past several years and look forward to seeing his leadership continue in the Senate next year as we take the suggestions that are going to be made through this commission and actually see them become law and actually see them become changes in Georgia in a positive way. So thank him for his service. And also want to thank the commissioner for all he does for us and all he's done for this commission. And with that, we'll say a quick prayer and then we'll go right into our subcommittee report. Our most gracious Lord, thank you for the opportunity to gather here in this building, God, and with these fine people and servants, God, that you might just bless our work today, our conversations, Lord. You might give us some divine guidance, God, today as we try to solve big problems for Georgia, Lord, and let everything that we do and say be pleasing to you. Now forgive us where we fail. Continue to guide and direct us. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, first up is our subcommittee recommendations. We created a subcommittee made up of several folks, and Brad Skinner had chaired that for us and did a tremendous job. And we're going to ask him to come up as a subcommittee chair with some specific recommendations. And one of the tasks that Chairman Beach and I gave this subcommittee was to look for ways to increase the opportunity for public-private partnerships and to look for alternative funding sources for these types of projects. So with that, Mr. Skinner, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Chairman Beach and Chairman Tanner. Pleasure to be here today. Sorry. Oh, okay. All right. What I'd like to do is, if you've got a copy of the report, I'd like to conversationally walk through it with you. Because I think it's, I get so tired of presentations that data, and I get totally lost. So I'm just going to conversationally tell you what's in the report and to see if it makes sense. If it does make sense, hopefully the commission will adopt it and then we can move forward to other actions with the assembly. So our primary mission was to figure out ways in which we can finance the future of public projects because Georgia has grown so rapidly, it needs to replace a lot of those projects. If you'll refer to, and the primary purposes of today's presentation is building upon Lieutenant Governor's task as well as the Speaker's task is to talk about the serious need for infrastructure funding. If you look at Georgia and all the challenges that it faces, and we'll get into those, it is a substantial amount of money that has to be funded going forward. And there's many options for pursuing that. And we'll talk about those, but we really are focused upon, as you can see in the last slide here, or the bottom of it, is to promote the future growth of urban and rural Georgia, to encourage collaborative efforts between the public and private sectors, and to support a comprehensive freight and logistics strategy so that we can make real progress on the freight and logistic assets that are going to have to be built. I refer to, if you could, in my report, the document you have, refer to the second paragraph of the second page, and that's right before desired outcomes. And I'd just like to almost read that to you. In that paragraph, I state, the subcommittee states, that this subcommittee report focuses on the compelling need for accelerating freight and logistics infrastructure throughout the state. And we have understood that prudent development of freight and logistics infrastructure rests upon thoughtful needs assessment, upon solid strategic planning, quality engineering, and high standards for construction and materials as part of the intentional effort to minimize deferred maintenance and to avoid premature replacement of public assets at substantial cost savings to the state over the long run. That's one of the things we kept coming back to as we looked at options and why it's important to develop public-private partnerships for the long term. Georgia may not be able to meet its infrastructure goals is another conclusion we came to with the conventional means and methods of project funding, design, and construction delivery methods. And therefore, this subcommittee is inviting the Commission's consideration of use of public-private partnerships for purposes of delivering state-of-the-art freight and logistics infrastructure in a qualitative and on an accelerated basis. Then we go on under desired outcomes, and I'll finish reading at that point. This presentation focuses on ways to attract increased investment for Georgia, both in the short and longer term. And this commission was tasked to think big. And so we're providing an option which can hopefully continue to expand our infrastructure needs because our traditional sources of revenue are drying up. All you got to do is look at the empty office buildings of any city right now. Those were property tax based. Their use fees that are based. All those things are changing, and we have to be aware of the needs of Georgia going forward. And how do we deal with the world that we're going to probably be facing? So as we sort of concluded our introduction, other states have looked into public-private partnerships. Virginia has been very effective. North Carolina has been very effective. They expanded their DOT capabilities and resources and competencies to take on more innovative public-private offerings and to negotiate those in the behalf of the state. And they then were able to move forward. And we all have learned, I think, through all of our experiences in this room, that wise capital investment in infrastructure makes a huge difference in the economic vitality of an area and also in the quality of life of an area. And you think about it, if you build things right the first time, not every 5 years, but the first time right for the long run, you wind up with a high quality of life and a great economic expansion for the long term. So as we look at the needs, you think about, I first came to Georgia in 1978. I was 30 years old, and I was so impressed with there was something starting to happen here. I remember though calling on some manufacturers in downtown Georgia, believe it or not. They were manufacturing companies and they were in old red brick buildings. And then every couple of years I'd come back and all of a sudden things kept changing here and skyscrapers were going up and parks were going up and all kinds of other improvements. And it was indicative of what was happening with the population. If you think back 50 years ago, the MSA here in Atlanta was number 17 in the United States in terms of size. And today it's number 8. If you think about Georgia's population in general, again, 50 years ago, it was number 15 in terms of size throughout the United States. And today it's number 8. If you think about 30 years from now, the estimates are that the population of metropolitan Atlanta will be 2.9 million more people. And that's a tremendous growth. It's like taking the entire population of Denver metropolitan area and putting it into the Atlanta metro area over the next 30 years. So there are substantial needs that are going to happen. Now, someone will say, well, it's going to slow down. Well, let's talk about it. People came to Georgia because it was a place of opportunity. You think about all the businesses that came here in terms of there was a low cost base to begin it. Midwestern companies, Northeastern companies came down here and the economy kept growing. But there was another factor that Georgia had and it still has. It's an attitude. It's a business friendly attitude. And that's not going to change. And I think about all the Georgians I've ever met. And I used to be a CEO of a company in Albany. And there was just always a positive attitude. And that positive attitude is going to get you through no matter what the changes are that are occurring today or whatever the needs are. So Georgia has tremendous opportunity for growth. And we believe that it really needs to be planning that infrastructure growth because, again, it affects the quality of life and expectations of Georgia citizens. The standard reality is that because Georgia grew so rapidly over the last 50 years, the reality is that many of those assets are worn out. They need to be replaced, they need to be rebuilt, or there needs to be new assets to keep up with the demands of the population, not only of the urban areas, but of all of the rural areas that are going to continue to demand an economic future. And you look at some of the needs that Georgia has. If you look at the American Society of Engineers and their report card comparing 2014 to 2019, there's all kinds of grades and you see them. Some of them are B+, and that's fantastic. B's are, I want to stress, good. C's are mediocre, and D is something less than mediocre. So there's some challenges ahead, and we'll articulate those in just a minute in terms of the size of those challenges. As you look at specific things that are happening in Georgia that need to be addressed, and these are all things that I think you're all familiar with, there's some huge freight and logistics challenges facing us. The Georgia Port Authority has created a magnificent port in Savannah. And that Savannah port is now number 4 ranked in terms of the number of TEUs handled throughout the United States. It's number 4. It could be number 2, I firmly believe, within 10 years. I've never seen a port this efficient, both in terms of the attitude of the board as well as the attitude of the executive director and his staff. And you know, that has tremendous potential for the future of Georgia in terms of economic opportunity for jobs and creation of that entire southeast portion of Georgia. And you think about their plans with Hutchinson Island. You think about a new bridge that'll have to be built because the container ships keep getting bigger and bigger. Well, that bridge is going to have to go up about 80 feet. Well, guess what? That's going to cost billions of dollars because you got ramps that are going to have to go out further. Or if you did a tunnel, or if you figured something else out, it's probably Hutchinson Island and the bridge or the tunnel or some way to cross that river is probably a $4 billion project. Now, where's that money going to come from? I don't know. And that's one of the things we're talking about with public-private partnerships. These kinds of huge projects have been financed all over the country, and I'll talk about that in just a second. You also think about all of the interstates that you have here in Georgia, whether it's 75 or 85 or 20 or the other major roads that have to keep growing. You got a Kia plant out, I guess, out there in West Georgia. Just announced Hyundai is going to move operations there. Another plant's going to be built. I think that was announced yesterday. Georgia's going to keep growing. Railroads are going to continue to be as efficient as they possibly can be. When I privatized the Mexican National Railroad, we made all of our sidings 10,000 foot length. Well, probably CSX and Norfolk Southern are going to want 15,000 foot lengths. Now you say, okay, let the railroads finance that. That's fine. But the reality is that when you have long lengths of trains, you're going to impact local drayage. You're going to impact road crossings. Just ask the folks in Waycross, which Craig will talk about on a regular basis. But you have to invest in this kind of infrastructure, whether it's overpasses, underpasses, or whatever, grade separations, if you want the quality of life to be sustained within Georgia. We also have looked at the impact of what the inland terminals are having already. Chatsworth is affecting the economic vitality of Northwest Georgia. You know, the Gainesville will hopefully do the same with the chicken producers and product. West Georgia is also moving towards thinking about inland terminals. Southwest Georgia could. And imagine for a minute if you could replicate Chatsworth with a public-private partnership, and the public being working with the private on fiber optics expansion, working with the public on inland terminals for both truck and rail. Again, making these places economic magnets for future investors internationally and nationally. So we think there's all kinds of opportunities that can be replicated for those kinds of opportunities. But if you go forward and you think about all of the other needs of Georgia, I pressed the wrong button. You know, I know there's levels of competency that I keep getting better at. And you think about all of the other needs. The county and cities have $34 billion of needs going forward. Now that isn't all freight and logistics, but it's a real need for public-private investment. Also, you have in the rural areas alone, 14 billion of needs over the next 30 years. So there are substantial needs. And so As we looked at all of those needs, and I think they're pretty well documented, we then began to focus on how could you make some of the public-private partnerships work. And we talked about that in terms of past experiences in other countries, as well as here in Georgia and the United States. And it's really just a way for business and for the private sector or the public sector to work together. PPPs have been in existence for a long time, and it's just shifting responsibility from the kinds of things that the public sector can do short term, 2 to 3, 4 years, to a longer pathway to get things done. Commissioner McMurray taught me a lesson. Oh, I'm sorry, did I screw up?
It's okay, no worries.
Okay.
See it.
Oh, okay. So, Commissioner McMurray taught me a lesson, I think, from one of his mentors some time ago. And he said that, your mentor said, Russell, you can build a house with cash and you can make it perfect. Or if you don't have the cash, you ought to get a mortgage. Well, I thought about that a lot. And it makes so perfect sense that there's lots of things that Georgia's going to need short term. And maybe there's a way to do it on a public-private mortgage going forward, because there's not enough money to do some of the things that Georgia needs to do if you're going to maintain quality of life and continue to be the economic magnet that you've been in the past, from our perspective. Now, the next slide, and I hope you all are able to see that are watching virtually, is that a public-private partnership can work very simply with certain guidelines. One criteria is the value of money analysis. Do you need the money now? Do you need it? Can you spread it out over time? But you need to do that kind of analysis. Are there some short-term funding peaks that have to be met right now that you don't have the dollars for at the moment? Are there restrictions to public bonding? Are there need for further innovations? There's a variety of things of why you might even use a public partnership. And then you could say, well, what are those issues then that need to be addressed if you're going to do a public-private partnership? And the first one really needs to be, there has to be a demand. Is there really a demand for having these things done now for the next few years? And if there's a demand and it's clearly understood and articulated, and that means the public has to understand it, then everybody, every level of government has to get behind it. And every government body has to be aligned with one another. Because what private investors constantly look for is, okay, is there anyone that's going to block a real common sense public good transaction after I've worked on this for a year and spent hundreds of thousands of dollars? So the government has to be aligned in terms of need and in support. And then there has to be just common sense stuff that any of you would recognize in government or in business. The project objectives have to be well established, and there has to be controls, and there has to be competency on the government side to negotiate properly. And there has to be existing regulation through the assembly that authorizes this, and everybody understands it. And private firm, and very importantly, and sometimes there are examples even here in Georgia where private firms did not have deep pockets. And so they failed because things change, contingencies change, history change. And so some of the assumptions of the model could not work that they were putting forward. So you have to find people, private investors who have deep pockets, who have the capability to perform in the way that they say they're going to be able to perform going forward. There are so many examples of the kinds of public-private partnerships that have already started here in Georgia. You look at some of the work that CERTA has done. You look at some of the other works that the Department of Transportation has done. Gosh, those just projects here within Georgia in the recent years has financed about $11 billion of capital improvements. Texas has done it. Virginia's done it. There's all kinds of examples. So we could probably run out 60, and there's all kinds of examples in the paper. Rail, you look at rail and how that's changed or could change. The Alameda Corridor was a public-private partnership in California and Los Angeles. It's taken about 36,000 truckloads a day off of the roadways of Los Angeles. So that traffic doesn't have to stop. It doesn't have to disrupt the quality of life of neighborhoods. There's all kinds of other mega rail projects that are going on. certainly with the port. There's all kinds of things that have occurred, and these are well documented, and we can talk more about them going forward. Now, some people will say, well, but this is Georgia and we have limitations on the gratuities clause, and we have all kinds of other statutory impediments that won't allow us to grow. Well, that may be true if you just look at them in an isolated example, but the Supreme Court has ruled if there's a public good involved, it's something that really benefits the future of Georgia through intergovernmental agreements and legislative authority that has been given to an authority of the state, that public-private partnerships can occur. And they can contract over a 50-year period of time. So there's a way to move forward if there's a public good. Well, public good is pretty clearly defined, again, by cost, by quality, and by quality of life. And so we believe there are ways to move forward on this subject, and that's what we can document it very well. So what we as a subcommittee concluded was sort of the following issues based on the needs that we know exist today. There's a large scale freight and logistics investments will be necessary for Georgia to retain its economic competitiveness and for its quality of life of its residents. As a subcommittee, we identified multiple projects throughout the entire state that should be funded for, again, those same reasons, quality of life and economic competitiveness. We also concluded that you could take an approach and just change every statute, and you could argue about this or that, but we said, well, why do that? Because all you do is get bogged down on short-term issues instead of the broader project. And so we would rather have the commission consider utilization of the intergovernmental agreements and the proper statutory authorization, which the legislature can provide, the assembly can provide, which would authorize an authority to be the primary tool for implementing public-private partnerships for freight and logistics. We also have examples we've concluded that are very successful. The 11 billion I referred to earlier, and then certainly the Georgia's constitutional test of intergovernmental authorities and authority having the right to negotiate public-private partnerships, that's been tested. Again, if it's in the public good, it can happen. And so what we did then is to come to some recommendations. The first recommendation would just beefing up the Georgia DOT as Virginia did, as North Carolina did, to have it work more aggressively and in an interactive, collaborative way with the railroads, with all of the municipal project organizations, with planning organizations, rather, with the regional commissions, and certainly work with the DCA and with the Georgia Economic Development Department, just a collaborative effort of what is really needed and identifying all of those projects for the future of Georgia and prioritizing them, serving as that clearinghouse. The second recommendation is to, again, to take an existing authority that the state has created, could be CERTA, it could be others, and to explore the possibility of modifying or expanding that authority so that Georgia's constitutional intergovernmental contract clause can be applied for public-private partnership negotiation and for structuring those kinds of activities. And in our recommendation section of the paper, which I think is on page 15, we just talk about what that authority or expanded authority could do. And that would be to have the authority to actually conduct contract negotiations, to rely upon a systematic plan for all of Georgia, and in that planning function to work with everyone, all modes, to really serve as a financing tool to come up with the funds that would make sense. And then as authority to work with state and local governments if necessary on freight and logistics improvements there and other projects over time. And the third recommendation is just to really understand grant funding and federal fundings in great detail. Those are outlined in the paper so that, again, we're taking advantage of all of the opportunities that could make a livability and economic expansion viable for the next 20 to 50 years. So We think this is a prudent way to progress. We think that it's possible. And we think the state has authorized this kind of direction if it is in the public good. And so we're submitting this subcommittee report to the commission, hopefully for further assessment and analysis. And hopefully the commission will decide to forward it to the legislature, and we'll find some folks who actually have election certificates on their wall to proceed, and we'll move from there. So with that said, I wanted to thank, though, a couple of other people that were very much involved in this project. From the chamber, Mark J. St. Aubin of Smith and Gambrell and Russell, Seth Milliken of the Transportation Alliance, at the Georgia Chamber, Denise Quarles and Chad Schaefer from Siemens. All these folks have been working with the chamber for some time on these ideas and thoughts. Certainly Craig Camuso was very helpful from a rail perspective. Daryl Van Meter at Georgia DOT. And then there's also a part of the paper at the end here, it's an appendix. So we interviewed a number of private sources of money anywhere that have management portfolios of 20 billion to 600 billion about their ideas, what they would expect. And these are just common sense ideas, pretty much the way they were articulated in my earlier remarks. There's a lot of folks that would like to work on this with Georgia if Georgia decides to proceed. There's a lot of money out there that I believe can be captured, and there's infrastructure needs that are significant that can be funded. Again, to continue to have Georgia as the magnet that it's been economically and provide for the quality of life and sustainability of its future. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And again, I just want to thank before we have discussion, thank the subcommittee. You know, Mr. Skinner has taken this project on from day one and has really ran with it, working with Griff and Russell and others, and just done a tremendous job. So, and pulled a lot of assets and resources that you know from around the country, and some of the people, his depth of knowledge is really unmatched. So I thank the speaker for appointing you, Brad, to this committee. You've offered a great deal of intellect, so we appreciate your work. And I also just want to mention too, and Brad touched on this, the chamber had put together probably 2 years ago a committee to start looking at public-private partnerships, because one of the things they were recognizing is that Georgia was lagging behind in that area. We do a good job with toll roads and managed lanes, but there's a lot of other areas that we're just behind in some other states. So they had brought Chairman Beach and I and others together to start that conversation. So this is really built on what they started a few years ago. So I thank the Georgia Chamber for their work in that area. I want to discuss a couple of things with you, Mr. Skinner, and then we'll open it up. One of the things that, as you were talking, and as you and I have talked about this before, and as I met with the commissioner and Chairman Beach and some other folks earlier in the week, kind of fleshing this idea out a little bit with you and make sure I'm on the right track. If the General Assembly next year expanded CERTA, for instance, because CERTA has an expertise in this area. They do public-private partnerships now. They also have a very good relationship with GDOT. The commissioner serves on the CERTA board. GDOT does projects, CERTA funds those projects. They handle the negotiations, finding the private partner. They do that today. And they've got a good track record of it. So instead of reinventing the wheel with a different authority, if we expanded CERTA's authority in the law to include things like rail, to include things like freight projects, to include things like airports, truck parking, for instance. I think there's some great opportunities for public-private partnerships with our truck parking, which we've identified as a problem, but also even economic development opportunities. And just as an example of what I think your subcommittee's thinking and what this commission may be thinking, but if you've got a community in rural South Georgia, for instance, and high unemployment, maybe there's 5 miles away from a short line rail that runs nearby, not a lot of opportunities for growth. Georgia Department of Economic Development's working to attract an industry to the state. They identify that as a possible location, but that industry will locate there in that area of high need. But they're going to have that short line extended out to service that area there. This would be an opportunity where GDOT, the Department of Economic Development, CERTA, if their role was expanded, the local community could all come together and show that public benefit. And in turn, there could be a public-private partnership to extend that short line out to that area, open up a major distribution hub, and really change the dynamics of that community forever. The other thing I think that's important, and the commissioner and I and Chairman Beach talked about this, is I think it's important that whatever is done to expand the role of an authority, and if it's CERTA, that we specifically put in the legislation what steps have to be shown to show a public benefit. That way, if it's challenged, it's clear that the General Assembly had that mindset that we understand that we're not funding private companies, that this is very much about a public benefit. An example, and you mentioned Waycross. I'm thinking about, if GDOT wanted to build overpasses or even, let's say, a site crossing in Waycross, and they worked with CSX, and that was a public-private partnership between CSX, GDOT, the local community, and ultimately through CERTA, they did a public-private partnership. They could demonstrate the amount of time that traffic was blocked, how much that cost the local community, how much it cost the public safety issue in that community for those people being blocked, and how often that occurs. And through that formula, they could prove this is a public benefit, and then in turn, that could be a good public-private partnership. So the opportunities here, I think, are I don't think people fully comprehend what you just said up there, that this could actually do. Now, in a little bit, we're going to talk about revenue ideas, because in order to do all these things, the state's going to have a payment that they've got to make. So we're going to have to find ways to increase our revenue stream. But expanding the role of CERTA and creating an authority that has the power to really go out and work in public-private partnerships with GDOT, Department of Economic Development, it could be a game changer, I think, for a lot of parts, especially rural Georgia. Did I say anything wrong?
No, sir. I think that's a real formula for rural Georgia. And, multimodal inland terminals, as you were describing, you could extend short lines into them, but also truck, economic development then can market. I would only add fiber optics connections, because the world we live in, you need those kinds of connections to be viewed as a world-class investment site. I would also involve your technical colleges in digital training, because any investor, whether they're in Europe or Asia or the United States, is going to want a trained workforce who is digitally competent. Siemens up the road could even help you with that. But yes, I think this could be a game changer, to use an overused slogan, for the rural parts of Georgia that need to be expanded economically.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of emphasis put on rural Georgia. The speaker has had a commission working on that. I know the Senate has had work in that area. The governor's had work in that area, but economic development brings real change to those communities. Yep. And this could really do that. I want to ask Commissioner McMurray if he's got anything he'd like to add. I know he's worked very closely on this subcommittee, and just curious, Commissioner, your thoughts on this. Do you think this has potential to work, and just chime in for us a little bit?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I want to again thank Brad Skinner for his work, for taking the lead. As I told him, and Matt Markham and Griff, it's easy to critique and pick at things, but he put the meat on the bones of coming up with original thought and doing a lot of analysis of getting at this report. So one, I just want to thank Brad for his time and his time away from his business and coming to Georgia in person. In fact, not being online, but making the trip to Georgia so many times now. So thank you, Brad, and for what you've done for this commission. Yeah, as we contemplated many things throughout this work, we just kept coming back to, if it's sort of the old saying, if it's not broke, don't fix it, for my highly technical term there. And so, but it's a way to look at adapting, and again, and I think going forward, there's work to be done to understand, how to expand upon authorities. CERTA and GDOT certainly have a great partnership or working relationship that's demonstrated, which is important to private investors, that they know that there's a confidence that they get through procurement successfully. And I think one thing I was going to say to Brad is he very humbly sort of went by this discussion with equity partners that he's had. And Brad, I would ask that maybe if you can elaborate a little bit more. And, there's an appendix here that has a lot of detail of those critical things that for private money to invest is important, but maybe just anecdotally, some of the, without naming names, I understand, but, some of the things you heard. And I think what I understood from you too is very important, is there's a lot of private equity that would love to do business in Georgia. And so if you could maybe expand upon that.
Sure.
I've got something to come back to after that though.
Well, the appendix outlines just common sense things that you would expect from any investor. Just that there's a clear policy that allows a private investor to consider options. Just there's a measurable process. There's the legislation that allows this to happen. That's their biggest concern more than anything else. I've dealt with about 25 different funds over my life. It's getting longer by the minute. But these are funds anywhere from 20 billion to 600 billion in powder. And, most fund managers remind me on a regular basis that they're going to lose their jobs if they don't invest this money. So there's a real interest to invest private money. And we all know there's a tremendous amount of private money out there that can be invested and really directed at the public good. So building on that, though, there was one of the funds went a year working with the city of Chicago. And the process wasn't really agreed to, thought out, and 2 councilmen blocked the project after they'd spent about $400,000 on due diligence. So there has to be a process. Somebody has to have the authority, as Chairman Tanner talked about. There has to be a clear purpose. All the government has to be aligned. And if you can do that, I think there's so much money out there. And so many of the funds I know are ethical. They're not the fly-by-night types, and they invest throughout the world. And they view Georgia and just what's happening in Georgia as a very positive thing, and they'd like to play a greater role.
Now, as an agency head, I think it's my duty to highlight the last bold recommendation statement
yes.
that Chairman Tanner mentioned. But for those equity investors to be interested, they like to know that they're going to get paid back. So
yeah.
There is a important part there to look at, whether it's an agency, an authority, and ultimately the overall debt profile of the state becomes a very important consideration, as well as you used the analogy about the mortgage. Well, if you get a mortgage and too many credit cards, you're in trouble. So you got to be able to pay for all those things.
Default's not an option.
That's correct. That is correct. So, so I'll appreciate that, and just highlight to everybody that last one that is in bold about the underscoring all these recommendations is you do have to pay your bills.
Yeah, exactly.
So. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And I think that's one of the reasons our next discussion today is going from a revenue perspective so important. In order for any of this to work, we have to have some dedicated revenue streams. Chairman.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Skinner. Great job. Thank you for all your hard work and the subcommittee. And I see Matt Markham here. Thank you for being on that subcommittee. I also would recommend that, if we're going to go with CERTA, which I think we should, because they're already, Russell's on that board. We've already done P3s for roads and bridges. We should continue to go down that process and add rail and some other opportunities for CERTA to be involved. I also think that the Commissioner DOT should be ex officio board member of the Georgia Port Authority. I think there's got to be a linkage there to give some comfort to some of these big investment companies that want to invest. I think that he needs to be and have a seat at the table at the Port Authority to be able to communicate what's coming out of the port. Once it leaves the port, it's got to get on roads and bridges and rail to get to Chicago or wherever it's going. So I think that that would be something I would recommend in the recommendations, is to make him an ex officio member of the Port Authority so that he has that.
Yeah.
I know he and Griff have discussions now,
Yes.
but I'd like to codify it where there's going to be some linkage there. And I think that would also give comfort. I don't know if you agree with that with the investors, but I would think that they would want to have
Yep.
some comfort that he's on CERTA, but
Yep.
then he's also
Yep.
Has some
It
communication.
adds to
with
the
port.
recommendation about a common plan,
Right.
which is the Georgia DOT should be kind of the people that manage that.
Well, he's managing the freight plan,
Logistic.
so he might as well
Yes,
have a seat at the table at the port.
yes.
One of the other things, a couple other things. One, I think the good thing about CERTA is the governor statutorily is the chair of CERTA. The governor typically is the person traveling the world under normal circumstances and recruiting industry back to Georgia, working with his Department of Economic Development to recruit industry. So this just gives him a huge tool in the toolbox to be able to maybe tap places in Georgia that are outside metro areas that don't necessarily have the infrastructure today, fiber optics, rail, the freight logistics they need in those areas. So it really opens the state up. So I think it's got good potential. Is there any other discussion from any other members or any questions of Mr. Skinner? Mr. Skinner, again, thank you for everything. I think really some good potential. One of the other things that we talked about, I know Commissioner McMurray and Chairman Beach and I discussed, was this idea of Commissioner, and there may be a better time during today's meeting to have this discussion, but we talked about the need to pull in, and you were talking about, Brad, having that complete full picture, but the need to pull in all the freight plans, to pull in the ports plan, to pull in our MPOs from around the state, all under one umbrella, under the GDOT's freight plan. Is now the time maybe to have that discussion, Commissioner?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree. And I think as we'll hear from Janine Miller, you may hear a little bit more about that and her vision and what her and Matt are doing with the new freight and logistics plan that's forthcoming, and how to really aggregate everything together comprehensively. And I think that may be some conversation, and I think you'll see some of that in her presentation as well.
All right, good. Thank you. Mr. Skinner, again, thank you very much for you, the subcommittee, all your work. Great job. Thank you.
so much.
Thank you. All right. Next up, our presentation is going to be virtual. It's going to be workforce development considerations for logistic needs. Mindy Metz, SRS Community Reuse Organization. So we will get that up and going.
All right. Good morning. Is there anything different that I need to do besides, I don't have slides. I'm just going to talk through my presentation.
Yes, ma'am. We've got you. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Chairman Tanner. As you said, my name is Mindy Metz. I serve as the Director of Regional Workforce Programs for the Savannah Riverside Community Reuse Organization, and that's also known as the SRS CRO. Now, over the last 10 years, I've been involved with managing our workforce initiative, and it's called the Nuclear Workforce Initiative. And it's helped create pathways for people to enter careers that they might not otherwise have considered. And one thing that we've learned is that just because there are many jobs and great opportunities, it does not mean that people have the skills, know about the jobs, or are even interested in the careers. And that fundamental challenge can challenge any growth. Perhaps that's become a peripheral topic in your world. I was asked to come here today to share some information with you about workforce development that we've been doing. There may be some similarities. My understanding is that you may find this approach useful to some of the things that you've encountered, specifically related to the transportation industry and the trucking industry. And I think you might find some similarities in our stories. First of all, let me just convey a little bit about what our organization is, because it's pertinent to why we've done what we've done. It's called the SRS CRO, as I said, and those of you who are unfamiliar with this organization, it's important to know it was designated as a community reuse organization by the Department of Energy for the Savannah River site. And our focus is on economic diversification and job creation in a 5-county, 2-state region that includes Georgia and South Carolina. The Georgia counties involved are Richmond and Columbia counties. And then on the other side of the Savannah River, near the Augusta area, are the counties of Aiken, Allendale, and Barnwell. So we have very, very rural areas and more metropolitan areas as part of our focus. This is key. We're governed by we're governed by a board of 22 members that are appointed. There are 11 from Georgia and 11 from South Carolina. This includes the economic developers of the region, the Chamber of Commerce presidents, the leaders of the technical colleges and universities, and business leaders in the region. And another key point that has played out very nicely over time is that we are a private nonprofit organization. Now, in 2008, our board of directors was certainly aware of some big things that were on the horizon. In our region, in 2008, there was huge promise of expansion in the nuclear energy industry at Plant Vogtle and new missions at the Savannah River site, where many Georgians are employed. There was a lot of buzz about the jobs in this nuclear industry that would come to our area, and it just sounds great. But our board of directors had some thoughts on this. More specifically, how many jobs? What kind of jobs? How do we assure that we can fill the jobs with people in our region? Do people have the skills for the jobs? And at the time, there were a lot of national studies going on, and it's sort of relevant to today. We see a lot of studies going on about workforce needs. And our organization decided to do a local study just what that need was, and created a task force to address this issue locally. From that, they did some studies and commissioned a study by Booz Allen Hamilton that became a significant driver in the entire initiative that moved forward. There were 8 nuclear employers involved. And from that, they found the need for 10,000 new jobs over 10 years. And those were not just the jobs. There were many, many more jobs besides those 10,000, but those were the jobs that they were most concerned about because they didn't think they were going to be able to fill them. The reasons, because there's an aging workforce. Most of the workforce was in its mid-50s. There was competition for workers with other industries that seemed much more attractive. Think about a Google-esque working environment versus a very procedural driven nuclear environment. And furthermore, we're talking about jobs that you might not think about. So I just would ask you, what do you think of when you think of a nuclear industry job? It may be like when you think of a trucking industry job. It may be different than what people think. People think of nuclear engineers, or maybe they think of Homer Simpson, but that's not the reality at all. The industry does require engineers and chemists, but it requires welders, it requires operators, maintenance mechanics, electricians, computer technicians, and every business realm that you can imagine. The industry is extremely safety conscious. It can be a rigid work environment driven by many procedures. And so with the results of this formal study in hand, the SRS CRO brought together employers, educators, economic development entities to discuss how do we set up the programs that are needed to get this workforce? How do we interest people in these careers? And it just kept coming out that there's a lot more to this than people thought. It became a bit overwhelming, and the task force mission was really cemented in promoting and expanding workforce development capabilities, not by creating curriculum, not by creating new training programs, but by facilitating partnerships between the people that do. And that is really what has happened with this initiative over time. We were dealing with the fundamental question of how do we assure that local people have the skills needed for these jobs? And we used an integrated approach to solve that problem. So the first step that the task force went forward with was to actually establish this initiative and hire staff to look after this initiative and basically think about it 24/7 and to see the connections. We initially brought together 8 superintendents from 8 different school districts who had never ever sat in the same room together. We brought together employers who had the same issues, but they had never sat in a room together to talk about them. And we identified the programs that were needed in our region. There are many things that happened along the way, and I think that's something that we can share in discussion if you're interested. But I will tell you that our big leap forward on this effort took place when the task force really sat down with this knowledge and drafted a plan on what was needed and had a partner for each piece of that plan. It was proposed to the Department of Energy Environmental Management, who funded a grant that involves 2 technical colleges, 3 universities across the 5-county region. We, the SRS-CRO, is the fiscal agent of that grant, and that is actually very significant because as a nonprofit entity, our overhead is extremely low. So a great deal of the funds do not go to overhead. We're about 5% for our overhead. And this has put new training programs in place in our region. It's led to multiple grants worth millions of dollars. There are scholarships for students. If you fast forward ahead right now, we have been over 1,100 scholarships for students in our region in 36 different fields of study that are relevant to the nuclear industry, but also relevant to other industries as well. We've been able to attract people from non-traditional backgrounds for this industry and to help boost the opportunities for those in our community and to better understand the capabilities that are there for others to reach. And so with that, I know that when we first talked about this presentation and the issues that perhaps you've run across with respect to the trucking industry and maybe other industries as well, there's a lot of similarities. I did some searches on some of the studies that have been done for the industry, the trucking industry, and recognize that a lot of the similarities include that many people are not aware of the opportunities. They have an unrealistic view of what the career path is like and the different opportunities. And I offer to you what we've done, and I look to you to let me share with you what is most relevant about that might be helpful.
All right, thank you. You know, it's an interesting concept, and I'm trying to think through as you're talking about the linkage between what we could recommend. Because one of the things, our technical colleges have done an excellent job in Georgia, and one of the reasons they do a good job is because they have boards for every industry, and they meet with industry leaders in their technical college region on a quarterly basis to make sure they're staying relevant and current. So what they're teaching in the technical college is actually what's needed in the real world. But I think one of the challenges in Georgia is how we need to reach down further into the schools, into the middle schools and high schools to let students know that there's opportunities in freight and logistics. There's opportunities in other fields so that everyone doesn't necessarily just feel like I've got to go to a 4-year college having no idea what I'm going to do with the rest of my life. I think it's so important to start internships earlier in your school career, early in high school, or maybe even in late middle school. Just curious if anybody else has any thoughts on that, or how to link what they've done successfully as a recommendation that for the state to consider. Not sure if it's something we mandate legislatively, or if it's just something we can encourage that the Department of Education take a look at. How can they do this statewide? How can they create this ability down into the school system? If anybody has any, mash your button there if you don't mind. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was part of that workforce development operation in the Savannah River CSRA area. And you just hit on one of the issues that came up, and that was identifying where the workforce was coming from. How do you actually attract folks before they get to college? Because once they get to college, they can go in many directions, not always the best direction for their life, but working through a very organized and concentrated effort to bring the opportunities to middle school kids and then high school kids, and make sure that they were, that effort was supported by the superintendents of those various school districts. Really made a huge effort and allowed an opportunity for people to come in and make presentations on what opportunities lied out there for various individuals in the nuclear industry. And like I said, that included trucking as well. You have not only welders, but truckers, you have people hauling nuclear material. And the idea was the similarity is in that there was a proposed plan put in place to highlight that opportunity to students throughout school age, K through 12, and then in the technical colleges. And then we actually relied on the technical colleges and the universities for various levels of expertise that were needed. So that, and Augusta Tech is part of that, as well as Aiken Tech. So the technical colleges have been integrally involved in this process. And I do believe in this particular instance, if we look at the trucking industry, that's where our training comes in. But developing workforce to move into that training was really what I was more considering when we heard Rebecca talk about the ability to not attract that younger age group into the trucking industry, where her average or her median was over 45. They're coming in at the latter part of their careers instead of coming in earlier. So it was just an opportunity to consider what mechanisms we might be able to use. I struggle with a way that this commission could suggest to the legislature some way of supporting that, but it might be possibly through a grant situation to nonprofits that might be willing to take on that role to generate a program that would allow the education of people, or at least the opportunity for them to learn about opportunities for them in their career paths in the future.
That's a good idea, because sometimes I think we get so caught up in trying to solve all the problems that we forget that if we could just create the ability for imagination, ingenuity, to create that pathway, and then just turn that loose and let folks in Georgia come up with a solution. If the state maybe came up with a grant program through whoever runs it, technical college system, economic development, whoever the appropriate entity would be, to have a competitive process where you award a couple of grants over a period of a year to nonprofits or other entities who would be interested in creating a way to spur workforce development, specifically dealing with middle school and high school students, and opening up those opportunities. That's a good idea. This is what I'm about to say may not necessarily be always politically popular, but since I'm not running for re-election, I guess that's okay. But I've often thought that we miss an opportunity in Georgia with hope, because, today you can go to college, and I've got 4 daughters, one's at Georgia now, but you can go to college today. If you've got a certain GPA, you can get hope. If you've got a higher GPA, you get Zell Miller. Doesn't matter what you major in. You can go to college and get a 4-year degree and never work in that field. And there's a lot of degrees, and we know statistically that some folks graduate with a certain degree. There's less than a 50% chance they're ever going to be employed using that degree. I've often personally thought that hope should be structured in a way to where it has a base, but if you go into one of our high demand fields, it would pay more. And even to the point of, I chair the Mental Health Commission. I've even said, if you want to attract clinicians to rural Georgia where we have a high demand, why don't we revamp Hope and even say, if it requires a master's degree, if you agree to practice in one of these high demand areas, we'll pay 100% of your education, because the return on investment's greater for this public benefit of the money that's being spent. But I think it's a great concept to consider offering a grant opportunity for this innovation. So,
and if I may,
If I might add one thing, I believe it would be important to make sure that we covered all aspects of freight and logistics, not only from the Port Authority standpoint, but from GDOT standpoint, and from the people in the trucking industry, the people on the rail side, because I think all of them have the same problem that we're faced with in our engineering disciplines is we have a shortage of skilled workforce, of educated workforce. And I think if we were able to make sure that we encompassed all aspects of freight and logistics and created a workforce development plan that would assure that moving forward that they would have adequate people to grow, then we really would have accomplished something at that point.
And I think too, even though this commission's got a specific task of focusing on freight and logistics, I think we could say that the component had to be freight and logistics, but it could be more expansive, so that if a nonprofit's creating this opportunity and partnering with their local schools to increase workforce development, it would not just have to be just freight and logistics, but that would have to be one of the career paths that they were focused on. I believe that Mindy has another comment online. Ms. Metz.
I was just going to add that the work that we've done, the money that's come in has gone straight to the academic institutions, in this case, post-secondary institutions. So both Augusta Technical College and Augusta University have directly, they set their own programs. And so they're able to boost what the state of Georgia has already got in place with these additional scholarship funds that help move people into those fields of study. And I think also I wanted to share that with respect to this overall initiative, it's been a great connector. By using a nonprofit organization in this role, we've been able to connect employers who wouldn't normally talk to each other. We've been able to connect that with educators who might not normally see themselves as partners for an initiative and an effort. And there are so many things that happen out there in the world. I'll just give you an example. When I looked at trucking industry, I have two sons who are now grown, but they were both in Scouts. And I vividly remember when they had, were learning about careers, and a trucker came to their program and showed them his truck. He talked about his career, and those two boys came home, told me about it. I'm sure their leaders learned about it. And so there were a multitude of people that learned from that one experience. The reality is there's nothing to connect to for people after those experiences. And so creating that connectivity through the programs in middle schools and on through pathways in training is very, very important in order to building that workforce.
Mindy, let me ask you a couple of questions following up on that. If we created or recommended, and then ultimately the General Assembly and through the budget process created a grant opportunity to fuel ideas for workforce development, number one, how much, based on your experience, do you think that grant award would need to be per year? And then second question is, how many years would that need to be guaranteed for? I would expect, we know it couldn't happen in a year, not going to be able to show data in a year that it's successful or not successful. So I would expect maybe a minimum of 3 years, maybe longer, maybe 5, so that you could actually track someone from 9th grade through they're actually in the workforce. What's your thoughts on that, those two questions?
Well, I think that return on investment question is super key, and it makes it challenging for a lot of folks, because I know we've been at this for 10 years, and I can tell you that when you're looking at trying to attract students into a program, if you think of a 9th grader, you've got to cultivate that interest, and then they've got many, many options, and you don't really know which way they're going to go. And so, I mean, you're looking at, it potentially, at least 5 to 7 years later before you really see that return on investment. And that is a challenge. So establishing what those metrics are, is the metric, how many students move into a particular program, or is it them moving into the workforce, is something that really has to be considered in order for people to be satisfied with the program. The other thing that happens is that it takes a lot of time to get programs approved. And so just because something's funded doesn't mean that you're going to have somebody go through it that same year. And those are issues that we've run into along the way. In terms of how much money, I can tell you that our grants have run for 5-year periods of time at about $1 million a year, and that they involve 5 to 6 different institutions. Our role, the money predominantly goes straight to the institutions. They set up their own programs and plans based on their area of expertise. And we work very hard to make sure there's not competition between the partners so that everyone is working in their realm that they're good at. So in one case, in our realm, it may be somebody's teaching radiation protection technology and someone else is teaching nuclear engineering technology. So they're not competing with one another. I hope that helps answer the question.
Yes, thank you.
Can
Mr.
I
Skinner?
make a quick comment as well?
Yeah, I'd just like to build on the, your thoughts, Chairman, and Mindy's thoughts. I've had experience with the private sector with Boeing and with Siemens, where they literally, 40% of Boeing's workforce is going to retire within 5 years. They're in deep trouble and they recognize it. So they are developing like a junior apprentice program in the junior high schools and the high schools where people really can have practical experience and learn skill sets that they probably are not learning today. So you could go through a private placement as Mindy talked about, or you could have a more formal program where private companies working with the educational system of Georgia could have access and start teaching directly. And I think that could lead to an even more desirable tool for the economic development department to market various communities that had that kind of training. So it's just don't leave out the private sector. I'm just suggesting that.
No, I think that's right. And I think that the idea of grants from the state just to get something to jump start it off, but ultimately, if it's working, the private sector would have a reason to want to invest in that. And Chairman Beach mentioned our Quick Start program in Georgia too, which is great. Trying to find a way to reach down and grab those students early and get them interested, because just like Mindy said, people don't realize the opportunities in freight. And we heard from UPS, we heard from Shaw Industries last year, $100,000+ driving a truck. I don't think many students realize that.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, Mindy, thank you very much for your time, and we appreciate you being with us.
Thank you.
All right. Next up is an in-person presentation, I believe, recap on freight infrastructure needs from Tom Hutchison with HNTB. So we'll get him set up.
Oh, sorry.
All right, thank you, Chairman Beach, Chairman Tanner, members of the commission. Very pleased to have this opportunity today. This presentation this morning is going to focus on freight infrastructure needs and also includes some benchmarking information from a survey from some other states around the country regarding their own freight and logistics plans. So as background, and this is very timely considering Chairman Tanner's comment earlier this morning, GDOT does produce some pertinent plans in this space that ultimately roll up into the statewide transportation plan. From a freight and logistics perspective, in particular, there's two key efforts from GDOT. That is the actual GDOT freight and logistics plan and also the GDOT rail plan. Freight and logistics plan was last updated in 2013. GDOT is going to be updating that again with an expected completion of the first quarter of 2023. GDOT's 2015 rail plan update is actually in progress right now. And then of course we have capital programs and improvement plans from the Georgia Ports Authority, from Hartsfield-Jackson. And collectively, this body of work makes up much of the vision for freight and logistics in the state of Georgia. So since 2013, when GDOT completed their previous freight and logistics plan, there's been a lot of progress. So emerging from that plan was a project list. That project list was multimodal. You can see on the right side of this slide is a table which is a subset of the overall project list from this. These are projects that have been completed or are under construction as of right now. So you can see a tremendous amount of progress since then. There's been a lot of delivery from the recommendations in that plan. And you can see a map in the middle with various projects geographically distributed around the state in various status, planning, programmed, construction, and complete. So the bottom line here is that there has been a tremendous amount of progress, and GDOT is teeing up to update this plan moving forward. But recognizing that GDOT completed their plan about 7 years ago, we wanted to look around the country and get a sense of how other states were going about developing their own plans, identifying their own freight and logistics needs, and then evaluating those needs and matching them toward project costs and funding. We selected the ones you see here in green. These were selected for several reasons. There's geographic diversity. There's some that are have coastal elements, some that are inland, some states that are larger than Georgia, some smaller, and some that are very much on par. And you can see some of the data that was pulled from these on the right side, and you can kind of see where Georgia lies in relation to these other states in terms of National Highway Freight Network mileages and some other characteristics. Yes, sir.
Talk to us a little bit about the cargo airports. We seem to be at the bottom there. Like North Carolina's has doubled what we have.
Yeah.
Can you just kind of talk a little bit about what we could do to increase our cargo via air?
So this is not a measure of quantity. This is a measure of just the number of meaningful air cargo ports that you see here. So other states have more, some have less, but these are airports within the state that have what was considered a meaningful, according to the Bureau of Transportation Statistics, meaningful cargo operation today. Yep.
Commissioner, we have what, 106 general aviation airports around the state. Do you think we could have more than 10 that could be in the air cargo business from a strategic standpoint of location?
Yes, Chairman.
You want to turn?
Yeah, Chairman. Our aviation plan has just been updated, and that air cargo was something that was part of that. And I can't recall the exact number. I think this data is accurate, but the opportunity to expand is vital and critical for air cargo, and the sensitivity of timing now in air cargo and freight is becoming even more important. So I do think you'll see that number expand in the future, but it's something that is critical for the continued growth of the state.
I mean, because I could tell you, I would think in the healthcare industry, getting product from point A to point B in a timely manner would be critical. And I think we could have an opportunity to maybe, I just saw the other day where they're going to start shipping the vaccine for COVID-19 and through air and so on. So I just want us to be on the cutting edge on our air cargo.
Yes, sir.
Very good. So as we scanned these other plans, we noticed some similarities across them and also some unique characteristics. So I wanted to highlight some of those. There's typically consistency, at least within the topical organization. We've got these 4 major modes, and a lot of the discussion and analysis is siloed into these modes to some extent, with some intermodal connection considered as well. But highways, rail, air, and ports, we do see, however, a lot of diversity in the identified needs within each state. Naturally, as you think about the different economies within these states, the different existing infrastructure, and the differences in future needs. But we see a lot of diversity in the project lists themselves. We also pulled some key data from these plans to help us benchmark and get a sense of where Georgia stands vis-a-vis these other states. So where does Georgia stand relative to these other states in terms of some of these metrics? This slide focuses on freight moved by truck. And you can see, number 5 on this list of 8 states in terms of tons, thousands of tons here in this figure on the left. Slightly higher up on the list and close to Florida in terms of truck VMT. An interesting takeaway from some of that data. Moving on to some of the other modes here, see where Georgia stands in terms of air tonnage, rail, and water tonnage. You can see California, Florida, and Texas on the air side stand out with significant tonnage delivered by air, and then clustering down at the bottom, with Georgia leading the way of the remaining states. Slightly higher on the list in terms of rail traffic tonnage, on the order of magnitude of California, in fact, in that case. The waterborne commerce tonnage, the number in Texas reflects actually petroleum products and oil, so that stands out as a very, very high number relative to these other states, but that's driving that. And Georgia's closer to the bottom of this list in terms of tonnage, at least, waterborne commerce. Now, in terms of actual assets, here's where Georgia stands relative to these other states. There's 29 identified freight intermodal connectors to the national highway system in Georgia. Of these, Texas has the highest number of over 100. Ohio with 60 comes in second. But these intermodal connectors are the roads that really provide that last mile connection between major intermodal facilities. Zooming in now on some data that's specific to freight rail movement in Georgia. And you can see here bar chart highlighting a couple different years of movement of freight within and out of Georgia. 7% growth from 2012 to 2018, according to the Freight Analysis Framework. A lot of that growth was exports, was actually Georgia exports via rail, and also intra-state rail movement. We actually saw kind of a flat or even declining import to Georgia in terms of rail over that period. And then you can see some commodity breakdowns on the right for these different origin destination scenarios. On the roadway side, we see some data here that we're familiar with from ATRI, but Georgia, as we know, has 7 of the top 100 and actually 3 of the top 10 highway freight bottlenecks. And in fact, 2 of these top 10 freight bottlenecks are relative newcomers to the top 10 list. Didn't show up even 5 years ago. So you can see how that's evolved over time. There's a number of ways to measure and evaluate and rank bottlenecks, but I think one of the key takeaways here is that relative to the peer states we evaluated, Georgia has some of the most significant challenges in this particular regard. So while each state has unique challenges associated with the delivery of freight and logistics, what we found by examining these freight and logistics plans is that the project selection process really generally follows the same standard performance-driven approach. There's an establishment of a vision, goals, and objectives, and this typically happens under the purview of a consensus-driven process with advisory committees made up of a host of people, not unlike the commission that's seated here today. And really, one of the focuses is also the alignment of these state system goals to the national freight goals. Existing conditions and trends analysis is absolutely key and one of the first steps, taking inventory of what we have, considering things like land use, technological advancement, consumer trends, and of course, commodity flows and the origin destinations, both existing and forecast as well. Stakeholder input is used and performance measures to evaluate needs across modes, and typically in these freight and logistics plans that are conducted by a DOT that focuses around roads and bridges, but to some extent integrates work performed by others, either port authorities or other freight and logistic entities, airports and such, to provide a consolidated, comprehensive list. The project prioritization process then follows, and this is typically data-driven. Projects are scored and evaluated on certain criteria that these advisory committees align around in order to distill that down to those that would be most successful to meeting the goals and objectives of the plan. And then, of course, attaching a dollar value to that investment level and then constraining that with available funds or projected funds moving forward. So again, we saw a consistent process as we looked across these states, and anticipate similar when GDOT updates their plan. We also saw that there was a lot of consistency in the stated goals. So right out the gate, economic development, it's been talked about for the past 2 years with this commission. Did a word cloud here, and the frequency of mention of these different goals. Economic development appears right at the top with state of good repair and congestion, other benefits associated with this type of investment. And naturally, these goals and objectives also align with what has emerged from the National Strategic Freight Plan, documented here on the right side, that checklist. So the national review of these plans also showed that freight performance measures within these categories varied greatly. There is a veritable menu of these types of performance measures, and it's generally left to each state to focus on those that are most important, pertinent, and meaningful to the individual needs of that state. These performance measures can serve then as tools to evaluate efficiency and effectiveness of the system across all these modes and aligned with all of these goals. Another trend in these documents is the presence of discussion around disruptive freight innovations, and these are evolving rapidly. So we saw universally that all these states acknowledge the future need for alternative fuel sources to fuel and power the freight industry. And some states are even taking more aggressive steps, that are driven by their state's environmental approach and legislation that might be specific to a particular state. Alternative means of freight delivery are also being explored, including drone delivery in some cases, and really all states universally are looking at intelligent transportation systems to mitigate congestion and to help drive efficiency in the freight and logistics network. Some examples that even some we've seen in Georgia: Weigh in Motion, dynamic message signs, real-time freight management systems are some of those emerging trends. So one key point worth mentioning here is boxed at the top. There's really no federal standard, no federal guidance for distinguishing a freight project versus a non-freight project in these particular efforts, and states apply their own methodologies to get to what they're identifying as a freight project. So there was a somewhat apples to oranges in some respects as we think about comparing the outcomes of these efforts. But most states do have an identified set of corridors, both urban and rural, that are designated as the freight network. Some don't. Some states invest heavily in privately owned rail, we saw. And we all recognize the gratuities clause and some of the issues we've talked about over the last couple of years within this commission around that. But some states do exactly that. Some states don't have a port authority, and so there's nuance associated with the delivery of infrastructure projects there jurisdictionally. That's different from Georgia. And then, of course, border crossings create their own set of issues and opportunities as well. So what have these states identified in terms of a recommended level of freight investment in their freight and logistics plans. And this figure is not a spend, an actual spend. This figure represents the dollar value associated with the recommended freight projects in these plans. And what we did is we actually normalized it by population to try to bring it back to some baseline that would make sense. But from this, we see that by the way each of these states defines a freight project, we see what their annual freight investment is, per person within their state. And Georgia includes over $10 billion in rail and seaport capital investment projects that would not be delivered by the DOT per se, but does include that in the total. Some of these other states are purely focused on what their DOT delivers. So that influenced the outcome here. Again, not perfectly apples to apples, but you can get a sense of what the investment per person is across the states. And at least from a recommendation standpoint, Georgia's on par and even probably on the upper end of these 8 states identified here. So in order to meet the needs outlined in any freight and logistics plan and achieve those investment level, those levels recommended for the project lists, there's a number of federal, there's a number of state funding and financing options on the table that we've seen. This slide identifies some federal programs for both funding and finance, and there are a lot not even listed here. So there's quite a few opportunities out there. And some of these are specific to a particular mode. Some might be specific to a particular geography or have other certain characteristics that that make them unique. But there's the point here is that there's a lot out there from a federal perspective. And then as we think about the state perspective, this slide captures a diversity of options that various states have employed to match those federal dollars. And you can see a host of state revenue sources dedicated for freight and a couple financing opportunities as well. But this runs the gamut. And one thought that we had that could be a helpful framework would be, what if we were to take these potential funding sources at the state level and others that might not even be listed here, and then kind of put them up against some funding evaluation criteria, characteristics that a group of stakeholders agrees would be appropriate criteria to evaluate, and then rank them, and then see where that may shake out in terms of a preferred or desirable approaches for state revenue sources. So with that, one of the key next steps, and we've touched on this already, is really for the Georgia DOT to complete their freight and logistics plan update. One element of that could certainly be looking at the economics of this, in addition to the project list, but actually perhaps update those economic impact calculations. We see from some previous work from GDOT back in 2010 that every dollar invested can generate somewhere between about $4 and $8 in economic output. So there's a tremendous upside to investment in all infrastructure and freight and logistics infrastructure as well. But certainly some of the core elements of this, will be establishing that listing of critical project needs. I think integrating, needs from other modes as well. Calculating the investment required and then integrating it with the statewide strategic transportation plan. A couple other considerations here would be to think about looking at your existing primary origins and destinations within the state, and those that you forecast to be integral in the future, and then really marrying the freight project prioritization to to those critical corridors, and we see that around the country as a best practice. And then also thinking about this idea of bottlenecks. We've got ATRI who identifies bottlenecks. They use a certain methodology. But is there some way, Georgia might want to evaluate and characterize bottlenecks within our own state to customize it for the unique needs of the state of Georgia? So with that, what questions?
Thank you very much. One of those questions, and this may be something that the commissioner can answer, because you're talking about the different states define freight differently and freight projects differently. As we start talking about revenue sources and maybe dedicating new revenue to freight logistics projects specifically, it's going to be important that we have a good, robust definition of what that is. It's more than just rail, or it's more than just something people normally think is freight. It could be a intersection in Henry County that is a freight bottleneck because of freight projects. It could be expanding a roadway to a warehouse facility that's located in rural Georgia to move freight in that area. So, Commissioner, do we have that definition? Is that something we need to consider as a recommendation for freight projects of what that would look like? Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Tom's right. There is no standardization of that term, and I suggest to you, even to complicate things complicated even further, is the investment we're making in replacing rural bridges that may not be near a warehouse anywhere, but it's supporting agribusiness, which is our number one economy, which is an investment, if you will, in the logistics industry of farmers being able to get their crops out of the ground into market across non-load restricted bridges. That's an investment. So I think we have to be careful and welcome Janine's thoughts on this later as they work on the freight logistics plan, is how we quantify that. You're right. I think there needs to be careful thought and attention of how do you sort of quantify and track, and metrics, and is very important to know what's your return on investment. So you need to know what you're putting in and what you're getting out. So I think that just needs careful thought and deliberation of how we arrive at that, because the other thing Tom mentioned too is things are changing so fast with technology that we don't want to sort of box ourselves in either in the future that we may be too restrictive and, well, that's not really fits the box, but of course those can always be expanded. So I think it's a good notion, a good conversation to think about how do you characterize those investments, but they're pretty broad. Like you said, an intersection project that may qualify under safety funds actually has a freight benefit, because you're moving commerce more efficiently by upgrading an intersection. So it's a lot of overlap in that. And, sort of like, I see my friend Bob Dallas here, it's like everything we do inherently has safety in it. So every project we do is a safety project because we're making it better and safer. And when we do a project, but we don't quantify that as safety projects, every time you get a better stripe and reflectors and lights and things like that, you're making it safer, but it doesn't necessarily fall into a safety project category. So I think we just take some careful thought, and I think it's a very important thing to think about how do we quantify that, because you really do want to demonstrate the return on investment that you're making ultimately.
Yeah, and I think too, as you start looking at specifically asking the General Assembly to create a new revenue source, for instance, it's important politically to be able to tie that back, that this money is going to be used to improve the freight and logistics of Georgia. So being able to define that in some manner, but broad enough to where it gives you the flexibility you need to fund the projects that are necessary, I think is going to be important, but it still gives a comfort level politically that money's being used for the correct thing. So
I agree.
Any other questions? Yes, sir. Go ahead.
I wanted to follow up with Tom on one of the slides. It was the share of investment by state in Georgia. It looked like it was competing very well with Texas, Texas is huge. Let me flip back whatever slide it was on. Yeah, there you go. Tom's faster than me. As he mentioned, that includes all investment, road and rail and private. And I have to remind you that in that that analysis from 2013 included our SHEP project, which is truly the biggest infrastructure project in Georgia, over $1 billion. So that's going to skew that bar probably higher than you would think, having that investment in the portfolio. That once that project's done, that's not a sustainable bar. That's a snapshot in time. I really don't know which way it goes, but I'm assuming it goes down when you take over $1 billion project out of the portfolio there. So I don't want to give the false sense that, you know, wow, we're right there with Texas. I think the one project probably really changes that bar, but it is accurate data because it was in that snapshot of time.
All right, thank you. We got an online question too, and I'm not going to give his identity away, but he says he can't ask the question personally because he has a virtual 8-year-old at home doing homeschool. So I'll ask the question for him. He wants to know for a little, if you could give a little more information on the vehicle inspection fees that other states charge. And you may not know the answer to this, but is that for safety inspections on tractor and trailer trucks or other delivery vehicles? Is it an annual fee or at other intervals? And who does those inspections, and where does the revenue go?
No, and these are all great questions. This document, this source document here that's referenced at the bottom, Transportation Governance and Finance, from 2016, has a tremendous amount of detail on that. I don't know that answer right off the top of my head, but it's a great resource, and this was derived from a lot of that content, just identifying in a binary way whether or not any particular state exercised that option for a state match.
If you've got any of that electronically or that document electronically that you can forward to Chelsea, she can get that to the person asking the question, so they'll have that information.
Great.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right, thank you very much. All right, we next up is another virtual presentation, challenges for private investment in infrastructure. Daryl Wilson, Norfolk Southern, and I believe this is an online presentation also.
It is. Can you see me? Can you hear me? Okay.
We got you. Go ahead.
Wonderful. Chairman Tanner and Chairman Beach and other distinguished members of the Freight and Logistics Task Force Commission in Georgia, it is my distinct honor to be here. And I want to say a special thank you to Seth Milliken and the Georgia Transportation Alliance for some conversations we were able to have to help me prepare for these remarks today. And as I am the only thing that stands between all of us and lunch, I'm going to make sure that I stay on time with my remarks. I will tell you that these remarks are on behalf of the 18,000 employees who, at the start of this pandemic and this year and of the adversity, they do not have the luxury of appearing virtually like I am. They must show up every day to deliver the freight, to move the trains, to ensure that commerce is continued in this country. Norfolk Southern operates a 20,000-mile network across 23 states, primarily east of the Mississippi River in the eastern part of the continental United States. Every day, we touch approximately 45 ports, 65 intermodal facilities, and we connect markets. When you think about private freight railroads and Class 1 railroads in particular, we are about market access. If you're connected to our lines, you're able to ship your products across this country, actually across this entire continent, connecting Mexico, Canada, and the United States, and ultimately to the seaports, which connect you to the rest of the world. During the beginning of this year, it was an unprecedented time. We saw freight rail volumes decline by 25% in the second quarter. We had our entire automotive franchise shut down due to the pandemic. Intermodal volumes dropped 13% over this time in the entire industry. I am glad to say that today, in the fourth quarter, the rebound is on the way. And in fact, intermodal volumes have actually outstripped the 2019 levels. And one of the amazing things that I learned this week that I read, and I think maybe some of you may have read as well, is that Amazon, since June, has been hiring 2,800 people per day. An unprecedented thing that is never been done by any company, really, globally. E-commerce is driving this. And what we're seeing and what we'll look back on in this year of 2020 in terms of the vast amount of adversity and change is a complete reset of the supply chain, not just here in the United States, but across the world. And really this driving change is about the first mile and last mile efficiency. It's upon us and it's here to stay. And when you see that all of the things that are driving this from first, from ordering what you order today online and having it on your doorstep tomorrow, the consumer is driving that. And they're not going to change. They're going to continue to demand that type of efficiency in the supply chain. From a public-private partnership perspective, and a little bit of background about me, I've spent 11 years on Capitol Hill working for the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, and in 2001 came to work for Norfolk Southern. I'm in my 19th year. I'm currently the Assistant Vice President of Public-Private Partnerships and Government Relations for Norfolk Southern. And during that time, I have had a seat at the table for just about every public-private partnership that Norfolk Southern has achieved or has tried to achieve in the past 2 decades. Some of the top line projects, namely, that come to mind are the CREATE project in Chicago, which is now in its 20th year as a public-private partnership. The Heartland Corridor project, which involved the Port of Norfolk and international terminals, and the states of Ohio, West Virginia, and Virginia, and the recently completed Crescent Corridor, which was about a 10-year initiative, and it was about domestic truckload freight and building intermodal facilities across the Southeast to serve primarily the Northeast and the Southeast. First time that we were able to connect an intermodal network across 2,500 miles of rail, including Atlanta. When I think about public-private partnerships and what they mean, for us and for Norfolk Southern, again, it's about a growth mindset. When we look at a public-private partnership, it's usually projects that we can't achieve on our own, or if we're going to try to achieve those projects, it's something that's going to take us a much longer time period to achieve, and therefore the public benefits as well as the private benefits are delayed. So when we begin to approach our partners, I can give you a short story of Georgia of a public-private partnership, which this year will be completed. And in particular, I want to give a note of thanks to Griff Lynch at the Georgia Port Authority and Commissioner McMurray at Georgia DOT. These are two organizations which are beyond the best to partner with in terms of being able to achieve things efficiently, on time, and to share the understanding of the risk and of what the potential benefits are for not just Norfolk Southern and our shareholders, but also for the state and for the port. In 2015, we began conversations to look at some of the infrastructure impediments that our network had, primarily between Savannah and Atlanta. As you know, the Mason Mega Terminal, which will soon come online, was a project that had to be built as the Neo-Panamax vessels that are coming through the Panama Canal began to arrive in berth at the port in Savannah. And what you see when those ships come in, and I've been there when one of those massive ships is there, is this massive wave of freight of containers that come off. And the mega terminal was really designed to say, well, the first place that wave is going to hit is the terminal itself, where those intermodal containers will be transferred, hopefully, to a rail car, and ultimately be converted to a train, which will move generally north on our network to Macon and then on to Atlanta. But what we realized was that wave was eventually going to hit our infrastructure as well. And so we began to do a route analysis to determine exactly what it would take from an infrastructure perspective to take a look at the next decade and say, what is the position of Norfolk Southern to be able to meet this growing need for the country and for Georgia and for Savannah? And thus we put together a public-private partnership, very modest in terms of its total cost of around $25 million, a 50-50 cost share. And the infrastructure that was involved in this, and I did not provide any slides for this, but we did provide some to Georgia DOT years back on this, involved 2 bridges in Macon that were about 1.5 feet too short for vertical clearance of double stack containers on a rail line. And that impediment alone, those 2 bridges, which were at the end of their useful lives, ultimately, and interestingly, I should say, prevented the entire S line from taking a double stack train. As you know, we have two lines that connect Macon and Atlanta. And what we were trying to do there was to be able to run directionally intermodal trains from the Atlanta terminal between Savannah. We also realized that we have a lot of single line railroads south of Macon, and we needed to extend sidings. And one of the things that I really appreciated was the subcommittee, Mr. Skinner's report out to the commission about one of the aspects of what they found were 10,000 foot rail sidings. I can tell you a 10,000 foot rail siding is too short now. It is true. He speaks the truth when he says that. We have now 2 expanded 12,000 foot sidings. The last one at Blandford will be coming online hopefully by the end of this year. This allows us critical train meet capability between the terminal and Macon. And now we can run our trains directionally between the Atlanta terminal and on our Brosnan yard in Macon as well. These critical assets needed to come online in order for us to meet the demand, the growing demand that's there in Savannah that everyone in this commission knows it very well. I will tell you, I appreciated the chance to do this project, and it took us 5 years to complete it. And a couple of years were lost as we really struggled with the gratuities clause in Georgia and how we were going to be able to meet the legal aspects of privately owned infrastructure. In just about every aspect of public-private partnerships, and we have active public-private partnerships in both Alabama and South Carolina, and we're closing this project out this year in Georgia. One of the things that we look for is the ease of business to do that. And when you think about public-private partnerships from a rail perspective, we're very much about delivering those projects on time and on budget, because there's a return on investment from the private dollars that has to be met. And we're very, very mindful of that for our shareholders and for that. Actually, when you think about the operation of the railroad, we can't shut the railroad down when we work on it. So we have a 24-hour operation. So we get windows of time to do our work. So we have to be extremely efficient when we do these things. But the loss of those two years brings to mind that ease of business and the ability to be able to have a well-worn path to achieve the vision that we lay out in front of our partners is very important and critical. So I would tell you that we share the vision of this commission very much so, to create that capability. However you can see fit to do that. There are a lot of good models out there. Virginia, the Commonwealth of Virginia, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, to name a few, have very well respected and time-worn freight rail programs that help achieve these types of things in their states as well. And the last thing I will tell you is that not every public-private partnership has to deal with a growth capability or bringing on a new, let's say, domestic automobile manufacturing facility, or even for that matter, a new intermodal facility. All those are good projects, and all those have been public-private partnerships for Norfolk Southern. But in some aspects, just grade separations in and of themselves, which will become publicly owned, are very good public-private partnerships at times. Clearing certain places where trains are going to be blocked for long periods of time creates a lot of improvement and congestion benefits. It also creates places where freight railroads know that they can actually stop a train safely when they need to. And we work around these things. In many cases, we actually have crossings in our sidings, and those are places where we actually are going to stop trains, and we're going to be blocking those roads for a period of time, and it creates very difficult situations for the communities in which we operate. And we understand that. So I want to leave you with the idea of a project that we started in Indiana back in 2017 to create a bonded program in Indiana called Local Tracks, which all railroads could take advantage of and which cities could apply competitively to. The program is available online. You can look it up. And Indiana DOT selected 13 projects for grade separations across the state. Cities had to compete for those, so they had to enter into a competitive application process, and the freight railroads that were involved were also a part of that and invested in the ideas around those. I'm proud to say Norfolk Southern was very active in this program, and we got 8 of the 13 projects funded. So as you look at these things, look at those aspects of public safety and other aspects of congestion where railroads can be a part of the solution. We're not just part of the problem. And with that, I'll conclude my remarks today and appreciate very much this time to appear before you.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Wilson. Any discussion, questions, follow up? Commissioner?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Wilson. We appreciate the kind words and do appreciate the partnership. I'll show the commission the picture I have on my phone of the double tracks train running under the bridge in Macon just recently, and we appreciate the partnership there. And I would tell this commission and those in the audience that working on something like that, of the criticality of the timing of what was happening at GPA and having the ability to run double stack, the timing was just incredibly tight. And I wanted to commend our team as well for meeting the timeline, if not exceeding it a little bit, and using innovation, again, design build approach to the contracting methodology to get that work done very quickly. But also I just want to acknowledge and thank NS for their flexibility as we sat down and we had several sit down meetings. But as we sat down around the table, we both found ways to innovate and do things quicker to shorten the normal durations and timelines that we have all established in our practices and protocols. So I just want to thank you guys too for being flexible and adaptive, because we saw the end goal and the shot clock in front of us, and we all had to innovate to do things differently to make sure we achieve that. So thank you for the partnership.
Thank you, Commissioner. Anything else from Mr. Wilson? All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Wilson, for being with us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Well, next up's lunch. So we're going to take just a short break. Before we do that, though, I'm going to ask, I believe Chairman Beach has some comments about the last one.
Yeah, on the previous presentation, this may be directed more to the commissioner, but to kind of echo what Chairman Tanner said, if we're going to try to sell the idea that we're going to have a revenue stream or revenue source for freight and logistics, it's going to be critical that our members of both the House and Senate, when they vote on it, know that that money's going to go to freight and logistics. And I really thought about what you said, those bridges for agriculture, they may not specifically be for freight and logistics, but they're moving their product and they're getting to market. And I understand that. My question is on the last page of this HNTB, it says establish listing of critical project needs. In your opinion, Commissioner, is there enough critical project needs that could go into a bucket, if you will, or to a category of freight and logistics if we had a funding source that you would feel comfortable with, whether it be truck only lanes or rail projects or any kind of projects that could go in that category? Am I making sense? I hope I'm being clear here, but I just want to be able to assure my colleagues that they're voting on something that revenue is going to go in that bucket of money, because I think that's important.
Yeah, I don't think there's a problem coming up with projects and the quantity of projects that exceed a bucket's capabilities probably. And again, Tom referenced it back in the early sort of showing the accomplishments of the projects or project types. And when we say projects, they're like, improvements from A to B that came out of the 2013 freight plan. And I would think that the updated freight plan will point to those same outcomes as well. And so there will be listings of projects. And I think from our subcommittee work, that was one of the things that we talked about was the integration of really a comprehensive state freight and logistics plan that would be sort of all encompassing of those objectives and including, other like MPOs that have their own freight and logistics plans as well that they have around, Augusta, Richmond, and in the different MPOs around the state. So, it would be very similar to how we have the STIP and the TIP now that provide projects listing. There's an easy way to point to, yes, these are the type of projects that would, that funding would be allocated to.
All right. And then one other question, this may be for Janine Miller later, but also on their it said that there was no federal standard for distinguishing a freight project. My question is, if we had a category of money for freight and logistics, would we be able to leverage that for federal dollars? But if they don't have a category, could we be leveraging anything from the feds on freight and logistics?
Yeah, no, it certainly would leverage
Okay.
any federal dollars.
Okay.
I know Jenna, our legislative counsel, is online with us today, but one of the things that I think it's going to be important is, because I agree with Chairman Beach, I think the members, if they're going to vote on a new revenue source, is going to want to make sure that money's going to that specific purpose. And with the constitutional amendment that recently passed, the General Assembly now can dedicate funds where we used to not be able to do that without a constitutional amendment. So I think that's important, and Jenna can start that process, hopefully, of working on that definition. And again, making with the understanding it has to be broad enough, because freight is more than what we normally think about. Kathleen?
I just want to make one comment about that. ACCG was very supportive of that constitutional amendment to pass, where the General Assembly would be allowed to dedicate a fee or any revenues for that purpose. But just know you're only allowed to dedicate 1% of the state's revenues from the previous year. So keep in mind, there's going to be some competition from what gets dedicated.
Yeah, that's a good point. And of course, at the end of the day, we've operated well with House Bill 170 with the language that it's the intent of the General Assembly. And we also have in there that if this is not used for that purpose, then it goes away. So that's worked well, with those revenues being protected for the last since 2015. All right, with that, we have Chick-fil-A here for the members of the commission. We'll take about a 15-minute break. Just get your lunch, and then we'll come back in 10 or 15 minutes and get started back so we can try to stay on time. Thank you. We'll be in recess. All right, we'll go ahead and get started back. One thing no one can say about this commission, though, is we've worked. We typically don't take much of a lunch break, and we work, so I appreciate that. And I appreciate our folks providing us lunch today and all the help the Transportation Alliance has been to this commission. Next up on your agenda is Jeff Cleland with Amazon and Nick with Uber. Nick's not able to join us, but Jeff is here virtually. So we're going to ask him. He's going to talk about challenges on the last mile delivery. So I'm going to turn it over to Jeff.
Thank you, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. We have you.
Thank you. It's like the 2020 raising my hand. Hey, I'm here. Can you hear me over this camera? Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Chairman Beach, Chairman Tanner, and members of this committee and commission for the opportunity to participate today. My name is Jeff Cleland. I lead state and local transportation policy at Amazon. In this role, I oversee policy for all modes of transportation to get a package from the Amazon fulfillment network or a small business to the doorstep of our customers. Amazon's proud of its growth in Georgia. In fact, we've invested well over $3 billion in our people and operations since 2010. We have well over 10,000 full-time and part-time employees, including employees at fulfillment centers, sortation centers, delivery stations, a tech hub, air hub, and Whole Foods markets across the state. There's also over 60,000 small and medium-sized business sellers and independent authors in Georgia growing their business with Amazon. And as you can imagine, this size footprint requires a pretty robust logistics network to ensure we are able to deliver our promises to our Amazon customers. I'll focus this mostly on our last mile network, given the topic today, but I wanted to give a brief overview on how a package moves through our network to get to that last mile delivery. So we have our fulfillment centers. These are the large multi-million square foot warehouses that products are stored in and moved out from when the customer clicks purchase. And then there's the sortation centers where packages are sorted and sent to the post office, UPS, or Amazon's own last mile logistics network, which is more of what I'll focus on. And so then we have the Amazon delivery stations, and these are our last mile centers in communities across the country where Amazon vans and our other new innovative delivery services are operating out of. As most of you have likely seen, Amazon's growing its last mile logistics network as a company and as e-commerce grows as a whole. We have a wide range of vehicles for last mile delivery, from Sprinter vans to step vans, even box trucks for some of the larger goods you can purchase on Amazon. In New York City, we even have 200 cargo e-bikes delivering groceries from Whole Foods markets, and you'll see that program scale over the next several years to other major cities across the country. In certain densely populated areas with good bike infrastructure, a cargo e-bike actually has a one-to-one replacement of delivery vehicles while also taking up less space. And space is an important factor when you're dealing in the last mile in urban and suburban areas. Several cities are exploring curb space pilots where they can control the flow of commercial and personal vehicle parking, and that allows for delivery companies to plan around availability of curb space so that you're not circling the block, wasting gas, wasting time, creating more congestion. Again, it relieves this congestion, but it also makes it easier for us to operate in those cities. And then in suburban markets, one of the solutions Amazon is excited about is Amazon Scout, which some of you in the Atlanta area may have seen. Scout is a fully electric autonomous delivery system that operates on sidewalks, crosswalks, and shoulders of the road. Our device is about the size of a cooler that you'd bring to the beach and operates at the same speed an average person walks. It's also 100% electric and is helping Amazon drive towards our goal of making all of our shipments net zero carbon, with 50% of our shipments being net carbon zero by 2030. Safety is one of Amazon's top priority, and Scout is designed with safety, and it's able to stop or safely navigate around pedestrians, pets, and obstacles, and it'll instantly stop if something crosses in front of it. It's operating right now in Snohomish County, Washington, Irvine, California, Franklin, Tennessee, and right in your great state in the Atlanta area in Georgia. So these 4 areas, our customers, neighbors, and even local pets are first curious about Scout, but we have seen that this device quickly becomes part of the normal part of the neighborhood. We're starting in these suburban communities, but we're hoping to expand to additional communities around the country. These suburban sidewalks are some of the least utilized infrastructure in certain regions. as a country, we use our streets, especially in suburban areas, to drive to work, to drive to mass transit. We use our broadband internet, especially now during some of the quarantines around the country and that, but we don't necessarily use our sidewalks as much as we use the other infrastructure. So we see this as an opportunity to get some of those vans off the street and better utilize infrastructure that's not being used. I'll leave it at that. I know that there was supposed to be an Uber presentation, but I'm happy to take any questions. And again, I appreciate the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Does anybody have any questions, comments? We do appreciate the investment that Amazon has made here in Georgia and multiple locations around the state, and look forward to this commission's work resulting in some positive changes and improvements in freight logistics, which will hopefully encourage Amazon to take a look at some of our other parts of the state and continue to invest in Georgia. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Next up, we have Jenny Miller here. She is our planning director at the Georgia Department of Transportation. Glad to have her on board. Appreciate all she does. And she brings with her a wealth of knowledge from both Georgia and with the United States Department of Transportation. So she's a great asset to us, and I think we're going to get some good information from her today. She's going to discuss USDOT's National Strategic Freight Plan, which I believe was something that she worked on quite extensively during her time there. So thank you.
Good afternoon, Chairman and distinguished commission, and thank you so much for all of your time and attention on transportation, your leadership, but certainly being able to give this much attention to, I guess, what is at the core of our success, I think, in Georgia, a driver of our transportation infrastructure needs, investments for sure, and looking at the future both from a national and a state perspective. And that's what I'm going to speak about today, is how the National Freight Strategic Plan, which was released about 3 months ago now, is something we can and should be looking at here in Georgia as we take our next steps. So the National Freight Strategic Plan is found online at transportation.gov/freight. It creates a national freight improvement strategy for system performance. This is the first of its kind in history. It was required by the FAST Act in 2015. We really were able to dive deeply into the data that's available to us, the perspective of shippers, really a customer orientation that will help guide national policy, inform state DOT's freight plans, and our freight data and research needs, as well as a performance network and how we can improve coordination and partnerships. So jumping into the data here, I wanted to show, this is one way of looking at freight. This is the volume of freight by mode. And you can see this is by distance. So on the far left, the shorter the distance, the more truck is relied upon for those cargo movements. And the longer the distance, out to 2,000 miles, truck still does have a pretty large share of the movement, but you can see multiple modes and rail really starting to take shape as a competitive mode in the 750 mile range. This is important to consider these various types of origin destinations and distance of movement as we do our freight planning. But a projection I wanted to bring forward to you that's in the National Freight Strategic Plan is the modal increase. While there's an assumption that rail is about 15% of traffic, 15% of cargo traffic, even through 2040, the projections for truck increases are 32%. The increases for rail is projected to be 25% in the next 25 years. This is not small growth. there's a difference between trucks and rail, but this is pretty large growth in 2 decades. Another way to look at it is the value. So the National Freight Strategic Plan also has this important bar chart in millions of dollars. Electronics is the most expensive thing that moves. Then other prepared foodstuffs are the least expensive thing that moves. But what you can see is truck is really relied upon for just about, significantly, for just about everything. The ones that it doesn't have a huge reliance on is, that doesn't rely on truck as much is fossil fuels, which of course moves by pipeline, as well as gasoline, kerosene, and ethanol, which moves by pipeline and subsurface. All the rest of them are significant cargo moves that occur here in Georgia, and we will be taking a look at this very closely. I will say this data is based on what's lovingly known as FAF4 data. So it's 4th generation of the freight analysis framework. US DOT is right now working on the FAF5, the 5th generation. We're soon going to have that available to do our state freight plans. We're also going to have from US DOT things like a truck parking guidebook, an update to the Jason's Law findings to help us with truck parking. We're going to have a visualization tool to show how this will, all of the data that you'll see here throughout today is going to, we can visualize it for Georgia. And they're also creating an implementation tool for state's freight plan. We hope that this will help with that standardization that was mentioned earlier, that's difficult to cross-cut and compare apples to apples across the states. But I certainly know that this fresh data is going to be great for planning. And so that's a little bit of the, the nerds in the room love to have the fresh freight data, but truly this is going to help us. These tools are going to help us align with the federal dollars, which we hope will come forward next year at a minimum with the reauthorization of the FAST Act. Now, the Georgia perspective on those cargo moves. This is courtesy of the Georgia Department of Economic Development. Fiscal year 2020, 350 companies expanded or located here with $7.4 billion of private investment here. At 93% of that was for logistics-enabled companies, meaning they need inbound and outbound freight for their business to work. It's probably a main reason that they chose to come here, because our freight network, intermodal, multimodal, highways, connectivity to global ports and global airports are probably why these logistics-enabled companies came here. And it will continue to be something they'll require of us in the coming decades. Manufacturing and automotive led that logistics-enabled company investment, $4.5 billion by almost 200 companies. Logistics and distribution, $1.2 billion by 43 companies. And agribusiness and food processing coming in third at $452 million by 35 companies. Back to the national, in terms of what network those cargo shipments occur on. I think I might have shown this to you before, but I want to highlight to bring the attention here, because we'll talk about rural here in just a moment, is that 47% of truck vehicle miles traveled are on rural roads. So you can see here where the interstates might intersect at various cities around the country along the West Coast, the Midwest, Texas. You can see those intersections of the interstates, but how many of those miles, those vehicle miles, are in rural areas is important for us to consider as we do our freight planning. And on the rail side of things here, which is shown in the green, the rail shipments, 2/3 of rail freight originates in rural areas, and those of course are mostly bulk goods, and the electronics and consumer goods are predominantly moved by truck, as we talked about earlier. A little zoom in on Georgia here, how important that I-75 corridor is for truck movement, as well as the east-west connectivity that does splinter. If you can see I-20 and I-85, if you combined those two together, they might look something similar to I-75 headed northbound. I-95 obviously is an important corridor. We've got 10.5 million people, 205 million vehicle miles traveled every day, and an average commute time of 28 minutes. The freight that originates or terminates in Georgia is predominantly by truck. But I do want to talk about that truck as it relates to commuters. This is about the Freight and Logistics Commission, right? But this is about reliability and efficiency and safety of freight movements. The biggest problem that we have on our interstates is where trucks are trying to move during the rush hours. If they're, especially during a recent slowdown in traffic due to the pandemic, trucks had a lot easier time to get through during the rush hours and throughout the day. So it's important to consider all types of movement on our facilities. This another kind of view into the state of Georgia versus that national perspective. These are our designated freight corridors. This does not mean that this is where trucks have to use, right? These are just the ones that have been identified based on data. So we do have some experience in identifying important freight corridors. We will use that experience that we have here, the data that will be refreshed and coming to us to take a second look at this, enhance this, and decipher where else we want to go. But we have trucks moving in every county of the state. I want to now talk about the National Freight Strategic Plan, the trends and opportunities that are there, and give a little bit of a deeper dive on each of these. Growing population, diversifying global supply chains, the urban-rural dynamics throughout the country and in Georgia, increases in e-commerce and advancing technology. So first of all, growing population. This is historic and forecast freight movement based on population. This is a pre-COVID number. This is a 2015 number, but every American uses between a truck and a half of stuff every year. A truck to a truck and a half per person with a population growth means more trucks. I mean, there's just no way around it. So we're seeing a freight demand increase of at least 1.2% per year through 2040. And this is from, again, the National Freight Strategic Plan, a lot of that being carried by truck and some multimodal growth there as well. In Georgia, though, this is something I think we're all familiar with, the growth that's occurring here. These population projections are from a national source. And you can see the growth, how we have kind of grown up through the ranks here since 2000, where in the past 20 years, we've grown by 2 million from 2000 to 2020, that's in the middle there. But all the way out to 2040, we are going to be ranked number 5, according to these projections. In the next 20 years, we're going to leapfrog Ohio, Illinois, and Pennsylvania in terms of population. Also, next in the trends, National Freight Strategic Plans, diversifying and growing supply chains. These are the top 25 international trade gateways as measured by the value of shipments, again, from the Freight Analysis Framework 4th generation. You can see how important, of course, the Port of Savannah is, and how the size of that circle is quite close to other major ports around the country. Earlier, I think Brad mentioned that Savannah is the 4th largest port in the country. If you look at it by city, it's the 3rd largest city, because the Port of LA and Long Beach are considered separate ports, but they're, of course, in Southern California. They're right next to each other. That is part of the many companies' strategy to have 2 entry points from the West Coast, and at least 2 entry points from on the East Coast. And just because the Port of Savannah there is in orange, and we've got Atlanta on the map, of course, too, about the size of Cleveland, Dallas, and Miami, there is freight moving throughout Georgia to and from all of these dots, whether it's on rail or truck. And that rail intermodal looks like this. Pardon the little arrow there that's blocking the Staggers Act, but wanted to show this as intermodal freight, the importance of trailer on the flat car and container on the flat car. This is back to 2016, and how thick that line is coming from California to Chicago. So by perspective, we don't have as much rail freight as those long distances. Again, reflecting back to the longer distances, relying more on rail than the shorter distances. But I think it is really important to know that this volume of and growth and connectivity has just burgeoned in the past 40 years since Congress passed the Staggers Act. Increased network productivity and reduced rail rates by 43%. That deregulation and letting the private industry invest and innovate has been vital to our economy and to our transportation network. Imagine all that freight moving in trucks if we had not deregulated. How that impacts us here in Georgia, I like to reflect back, of course, to the Port of Savannah, which has two, both Class 1s, on terminal. The efficiency there is incredible for shippers, and it impacts all of our our counties throughout the state of Georgia. Every couple of years, the Port Authority puts out an economic impact that reflects the true dollar amount of on an annual basis. $106 billion, which is 11% of Georgia's total sales from Georgia's ports. I mean, that includes Port of Brunswick as well, by the way, which imports, is one of the largest import for automobiles in the country. And the other, I think, important thing to talk about here is the GDP, which is the ripple effect. 8% of GDP is coming from the Port of Savannah. The work that's been done there by the executive directors and the boards over the past decade plus have put us on the map, as I showed you earlier, and will continue to be an engine for our economy. They're also making major improvements there. As you've heard of the Mason Mega Rail, it's going to be the largest on-dock intermodal rail facility in North America, doubling capacity to 2 million containers per year. They can load 10,000-foot unit trains on terminal and is going to cut transit time by a day to Chicago, Cincinnati, Memphis, and St. Louis. Back to the NFSP for the next trend, the rural-urban dynamics. There's a cargo-focused analysis that was built into the FAST Act that we leveraged for the analysis here, and the perspectives that is going to be given back to state governments, as we do our next freight plan in agriculture, energy, natural resources, and manufacturing. These 4 industries were literally spelled out in the law. And one thing I wanted to bring attention, we know how important agriculture is to the state of Georgia. One thing we might not know is how important non-fuel minerals are to our state. Literally, we had last year $2.2 billion of non-fuel minerals produced here. We're 3rd in value of any state east of the Mississippi. These are things that can move readily by rail, but also do have to rely on truck movement for certain parts of the haul. Those products, those commodities, of course, are kaolin, granite, and titanium and zircon. Okay. Rural-urban dynamics. Let's talk about manufacturing here for a second. Manufacturing, as you all are probably quite familiar with, is interdependent with other manufacturers, suppliers, and retail customers. Manufacturing these dots on the map are really going to be a good indicator to us of our origin destination points. And you can see how many of those are in rural areas. This inbound to a manufacturing plant, mostly from a port or from rail, goods are produced. They are then shipped out either to the next chain in the next link in the supply chain, or to the retailer, which happens to predominantly be in urban areas where citizens live. So this urban-rural dynamics is really important, I think, for us to consider an origin destination as we look at our freight network and what it needs in the next couple of decades. A couple of national stats here: 20% nationally of jobs manufacturing jobs are in rural counties. I mentioned earlier, nearly half VMT for trucks is on rural roads. 80% of closed bridges and 90% of posted bridges, that is with weight restrictions, are in rural areas nationwide. That impacts the supply chain, no doubt. We're going to look to try to quantify that and understand how that affects Georgia even more. And those rural roads are most 72% are locally owned. Many are ineligible for federal funds and making things like maintenance and improvements very difficult for rural communities. In Georgia, 83% of private investment happened in non-metro areas through October of 2020. That was during the COVID times, I guess I should say. That's during summer and early fall. Roughly 80% structurally deficient bridges in rural areas. And we have even more of our public roads that are locally owned in rural areas. Here's another view of truck parking. Take a look at how much we have freight intensive land use locations that either need truck parking nearby in those rural areas, but also in urban areas. This is not an urban rural issue. The dynamics of truck parking are statewide. And as we can see, this is where we think the potential demand for for truck parking exists. Again, all over the state. I'm going to shift to another trend now, one I think that we've definitely heard about today, one that we have relied upon increasingly over the decades and definitely in the last 9 months, which is e-commerce. National Freight Strategic Plan spoke quite in depth about the increasing e-commerce, but this chart is courtesy of McKinsey that in 3 months' time, we grew in e-commerce what we were projecting to grow in 10 years because of the COVID deliveries. Here's a very recent statistic. As of Monday, Cyber Monday, 2 days ago, 15% year-over-year increase over last Cyber Monday. Largest online shipping day in US history. It's here to stay. This is what that looked like on our roadways, on our interstates, I should say, from March to mid-November. The light blue line shows truck volumes by day, or it's actually by week, I think, as we've aggregated it. And obviously, this is courtesy of GDOT's stellar data team, who's been viewing this since week 1, has been tracking movements of and volumes of both automobiles and trucks throughout the state on interstates and state routes. So a year ago is the light blue, and the purple is today, is 2020. So not only have we seen an increase in trucks since then, but we are over and above the truck volumes on our interstates that we were pre-COVID. And where that next leads us is to think, well, e-commerce is probably a large driver of this, certainly, as is the fact that we have shifted from a service economy to a goods economy. So service economy being restaurant, entertainment, travel, to now we have money in our pockets and we're buying more physical things, increasing the demand for truck movements. And so here's the interstate, and then we've got to think about the last mile. And the last mile is sort of a euphemism, but in reality, it's far more than just a mile. In denser cities, it's 6 miles, and more spread out metro areas, 9 miles, we're at 7.2. So we've got a degree of density here in Atlanta for the sake of e-commerce distances, and that could have a lot to do, certainly, with the private sector deciding to locate distribution centers closer to population centers and the like. Again, just Georgia is a great place to do business, and we want to continue these sorts of things. But it is more than a mile. These last mile things. And let me show you a graphic now, what that kind of looks like. So in a traditional supply chain, it's a very simplistic view on the left. This is how we're kind of moving to the advancing technology to support e-commerce. Very linear, regional distribution center to local warehouse to the store. And that last mile, or last 6 to 9 miles, was in a personal vehicle. Now that e-fulfillment center is putting out to parcel hubs, as we heard earlier, and then to consumers. So the freight means more than just the 18-wheelers on our interstate. That is things we have to consider for the curb use for all of those deliveries from various types of delivery trucks, whether it's cargo or whether it's your dinner. Those are things we need to be thinking about. At the local level, the state can support, the state shouldn't dictate, but we can help set up ways to support local governments as they think through those challenges. I want to call to your attention, though, how this looks to business. This is according to last month's edition of Logistics Management Magazine. 10 to 15 times more expensive for companies to deliver box to door than to the mass distribution at the stores. So these costs are become real and this is an aggregated, obviously kind of nationwide number. Every company is going to be different, but these are real costs that come into play. Let's talk for a moment now in advancing technology a little bit more here. The digitalized supply chain benefits and requirements. I'm going to just shoot right to the bottom line in that blue box. You can't fix what you can't see. Costs are something that companies continue to want to fix in transportation. If they can't see where the problem, the pinch points are, the cost drivers are, they can't fix it. So the digitalization of our supply chain is going to increasingly become a trend within private sector. And we are going to be at GDOT thinking through how we can support that, how we can enable those trucks to speak more to each other, to speak to their supply chains, and to obviously increase safety as they're moving along. So that is a depiction there of a real-time single version of the Truth Network. You can see that cloud of data is pushing and pulling data from all sources, wherever that cargo might be, to try to drive out those costs. And Internet of Things technology is also going to help with that optimization of the supply chains, advancing where there might be traffic delays that can predict what, when that 2-hour Amazon delivery is going to go down to 15 minutes, and probably even more precise as data flows are available throughout the entire supply chain. So we're the staff at GDOT. World-class folks. I'm really excited about the work that's being done there on vehicle connected signals in Metro Atlanta, and encourage you to keep an eye out for the work that's being done there. So no matter what publication you pick up, and I have a few of them here, this is happening as we speak. And as you know, the private sector moves at lightning speed, especially related to data that can bring costs down, and we're going to have a challenge keeping up with them for sure. But it is something we will be considering and thinking about as we continue our freight planning in Georgia. I want to give you a sense of the fact that Metro Atlanta the Atlanta Regional Commission is going to get started on their refreshed freight study. We're going to be working in conjunction with them. So we'll have a unified set of data, a unified set of assumptions and planning horizons that will help us think about this together as a region and a statewide, and how we have unique roles to play and fund sources to allocate. But what you can see here is loaded trucks per year between Metro Atlanta and Savannah as 103,000 trucks. And that on a total trucks annual, 235,000 trucks per day. Okay, 950 trucks per day are going from Savannah to Atlanta. That's some of it's from the port, some of it's from the distribution centers down there. At this point, when this was done, I think this was back in 2017, I believe is this data. This is 2015 data, I'm sorry. There were 3 trains per day. I believe that number might be changing. GDOT is also updating its rail plan. Grade separations are going to be part of that, and we'll be incorporating the findings of Intermodal Division's rail plan into our state freight plan update. We have 8,200 road rail crossings throughout the state. That is not a small number. Trains are getting longer, as we've heard. Blocked crossings are something that the commissioner and I hear about on a regular basis. And this is a large part of the reason, in addition to the increased freight flows that we're seeing. So we will have to, at some point in time, update for the federal government our what's called a state action plan for grade crossings. There was a proposed rule that came out last year. Georgia was named in the FAST Act as one of the top 10 worst states for it. So we're going to have to address that along with all the rest of the states. There are over $900 million in federal grants that were awarded in 2017 for grade crossing improvements. So there is potential there to go for those. But a couple pinch points, as you might see here, that we're investing in around the state. These are not inexpensive pieces of infrastructure. What you see here is anywhere from 7 to 14 million, but these things can cost upwards of $40 million plus, according to a report a couple of years ago by the General Accounting Office in DC. So we do know that rail improvements can help, these grade crossings can help with the crossing delays and also increase our safety at these grade crossings, which we need to address statewide. So I believe we're going to be looking to release, we, GDOT Intermodal Division in the lead, release that plan soon. And we are, of course, looking at grade separations, track upgrades, where we might want to consider new yard construction. And we've taken a look inside there about who can sponsor rail projects. So it'd be good to compare notes with others as a result of this Freight Commission about where are these sorts of investments allowed by current state law. Long range plan can include everything from the top of the state there in Catoosa County over to Rocky Ford on Norfolk Southern in the east part and down to Waycross, of course, and CSX for crossing projects on long range and some short range there on the right. I just wanted to touch on workforce was also brought up in the earlier in the discussion, as it was as a trend in the National Freight Strategic Plan. In terms of truck capacity, it has actually increased in September, the most recent data, but it's decreased 6.2% year over year. Likely has something to do with the higher demand for freight movement, but it's according to FTR, which is a national freight resource for data and perspective and research. They are finding that it's harder than they thought to bring truck drivers back into the driver pool after they leave. So also in warehousing, we're seeing a 4.5% increase year over year in warehousing employment. So all of this entire economy here is in some way interacting with or driven by then the workforce is driven by all this freight that's moving. I want to take just one step back to what we did with the first state strategic plan. This became our blueprint for what GDOT has been implementing over the past decade. We focused on workforce availability in our cities, expanding talent pools around employment centers. What we did here, this was the springboard for all of our work, was on the left column there. These are the things that private sector says that they need from their transportation system in order to locate into a new state. Workforce availability, operating environment, accessibility and proximity to customers and suppliers, that's where freight comes in, of course, and quality of life. So we use this as a springboard for the work that has been done over the past decade that has, yes, led to a lot of box checking on the freight plan that was initially drafted in 2011. That's what this graphic is from, and then updated in 2018. There are a lot of boxes checked here that GDOT has been driving and bringing forward that has been making a difference, I think, in our economic development prospects, as you saw earlier. But it's also been the driver for the Major Mobility Improvement Program. Those managed lanes provide incredible, reliable trips for commuters and increase the commute shed, decrease the trip time, so the commute shed, the talent pool shed is increased. So the MMIP is projected to, these are studies, once it's all built out, and that includes the facilities we already have on I-75 in the south and northwest part of the region, as well as I-85. But once we build out all of 285 managed lanes and Georgia 400, $355 million savings in vehicle operating across Metro Atlanta, and a total travel time savings of $3.2 billion. We're going to decrease 1.6 mile total travel by trucks and decrease truck congestion costs by nearly $1.7 billion per year. And these are benefits to all users. What we've seen in I-75 northbound is really, I think, a harbinger for what we will have in our future with the MMIP. The afternoon rush hour speed in general purpose lanes was 40 miles an hour in April 2019, which is twice of what it was the year before. So those trucks are moving faster because the cars have gotten into the new toll lane and gotten off the road. This is that interaction I was speaking of about the interaction between cars and trucks, and the reduced rush hour by 1 hour in the morning and the afternoon. All of this is going to come together in these next steps, blue boxes that we have here. We're going to be looking internally, GDOT, at a business-focused analysis of our current freight ecosystem, incorporating all of the things that are these trends and emerging challenges and opportunities. The National Freight Strategic Plan as a guide, the federal data that's coming forward, hopefully some federal funds that are going to support all of this infrastructure. All that we're looking to have done in a very short period of time to give us kind of an indicator going forward of how to frame up this plan, this infrastructure plan that, yes, it's required by the federal government. We will have to check that box, but we will not be putting a plan together except for that it will help us make investment decisions on return on investment, location, origin, destination, mode, all of it. So that concludes my report, except I do want to just make one note. We are not going to go it alone when we do our freight plan. The FAST Act requires that if we set up freight advisory committees, which we will do just like we did before, these are the types of representatives that need to come and be a part of our advisory committee. And so we will be reprising that and looking to populate our advisory committee with various perspectives for everything that you've seen here today. And any other guidance we would love to take on from the committee. So thank you very much.
So as you're doing the updated freight plan, it's incorporating in the Port Authority's plans, all the MPO plans throughout the state. So it's all of that's going to be included and uploaded into the GDOT plan.
Yes, sir. Statewide, comprehensive, all modes.
Mm-hmm. Good, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of good information. Any other questions, follow up? Chairman?
Yeah, thank you, Janine. Appreciate it. You touched a little bit on technology and how technology is moving at a rapid speed. And I know up in RCID, up in North Fulton, we did all those connected vehicles and doing that technology. I know when you were at USDOT, I think Secretary Chow kind of had a separate entity that looked at technology so they could go through it quickly and not get bogged down in bureaucracy, which sometimes tends to happen in government agencies. Is there something we can do to kind of approve technology, but then get out of the way and let the private sector move quickly? Because I think they can move faster than we can, and they are going to move faster than we can on any kind of technology improvements.
No question. No question. I'll give an initial answer, and I would love the commissioner to please augment or correct where necessary. But I think it does go back to what is the role of government and the role of the private sector. The role of government is for things that are used across the population, across businesses. Infrastructure, meaning. So what can we do to upgrade our infrastructure to facilitate that technology, whether it's equipment, whether it's fiber, whether it's towers for 5G? That is where I think we would delineate roles and want to be a part of the facilitation of that. Commissioner, if you want to.
Very well said. And you had a slide there that was fantastic that showed how the supply chain is reoriented now to home delivery. And I think it was the next slide that showed the little communication of how you're talking about data, real-time data exchange from the warehouse to the truck to the delivery time is key. And we're opening up our traffic management center data. So all our sensors, signal data, we're now opening that up so that private sector can access that very safely. I have to remind you, in the cyber world we live in, that it's an export of data, so that as technology continues to change, that you're getting real-time traffic feed information, and that only enhances the supply chain. To Janine's point is we're supplying sort of that infrastructure access, albeit digitally, that will help make supply chain and logistics deliveries even more efficient and effective. So, and this is really emerging areas and only enhances the efficiency, which hopefully enhances our competitiveness as Georgia, because we are making those investments in not only, like Brandon, as you talked about it, North Fulton CID, we're doing that across all of Metro Atlanta, including working with our partners at the ports so that there's freight prioritization as well. And there's a huge return on investment for efficiency of trucks if the signals adjust based on the demand so that trucks are not stopping and starting. So that's a huge efficiency bottom line game in fuel economy, which also has a nice environmental impact. So yes, I think it's a very critical item.
Any other thoughts or discussion? All right. Well, I'm sure as we start to put together this report, we're going to have other follow-up, but thank you very much for that information.
Thank you, Chairman.
And also, I think, I'm not sure if it's about this presentation, but Stephanie, I believe, with Home Depot, who's joining us via Zoom, I think you had a question or a follow-up.
I just had, thank you very much, Commissioner. Chairman. I just had two quick comments on the presentations that we made this morning, just sort of general comments. The first is, I would say, we've talked a lot about funding mechanisms and how we're going to think about funding all of these great ideas. I think we just need to be very cautious and careful as we do that. Georgia is very business friendly, and I think we've all enjoyed the massive growth that we've seen in Georgia. And I think the port specifically is a huge draw for Georgia, and it's all for business, and it's also a great asset that we need to continue to focus on. I just think we need to be careful that we don't want to do anything to make Georgia less competitive as we think about where we're going to get these funding mechanisms from in terms of taxes and fees and things like that. So just sort of a general statement on that. And then the second statement was, as we think about workforce investment, I think, looking across all of freight and logistics is important, but there is a really, really strong need specifically with truck drivers. And I just wanted to echo what I think Mr. Skinner said around looking at private investment as well for the workforce investment and maybe private grants. If you think about truck driving, I think there's 72 driving schools in the state of Georgia for Class A and Class B. It's about $3,000 per person, I think, to send a truck driver through them. So it's not quite the same as like the vocational technical schools and a lot of those other secondary educations. And so I think thinking about how to, yes, get in front of middle schoolers and high schoolers earlier, but then potentially working with private companies, like, I don't know if Derek has thoughts from a UPS perspective or some of those carriers that would want to invest in the actual education for drivers would be good as well. So just two overall thoughts.
All right. Thank you. Was there any other follow-up online? All right. Thank you. All right. Next item on the agenda is the general discussion of commission findings. I'll start that out just talking in general terms, and then we'll turn it over to the committee members for any other discussion. But just so you recall, last year we identified several issues that we wanted to attempt to find solutions to, and we've had a lot of discussion around these items this year. So as we start to put together a report, what we need to keep in mind, one was around workforce development, which Stephanie just mentioned, which is a huge issue. We can't continue to grow if we're not able to develop a good workforce. We've heard a lot of ideas around how to partner with our technical college system of Georgia in that area. We heard even today about the idea of maybe a grant program to stimulate some nonprofit and private sector interest in creating some pilot programs in Georgia to help expand the workforce. So that was one issue that we're going to have to, as we start putting together the report. And Abby here is with our research team in the General Assembly, and she's been taking notes through every meeting that we've had, documenting all the presentations, all the ideas. So she's going to put together a draft report, which we'll be getting out to all the members for review electronically and comments. And then when we feel comfortable, we'll send that out for a final vote electronically. So that'll just to let you know that's kind of the process. Second thing that we identified was truck parking. And we had an entire meeting dedicated to that. We know that's an issue. Janine said all over the state. It's not just in our metro areas, but it's all over the state. It's a problem nationally also that everyone's facing. One of the things that we had talked about earlier today was the idea of expanding the role of CERTA, which would give them an opportunity to do public-private partnerships in several areas, one being truck parking. And I know that the commissioners had some other thoughts on that. I'm going to maybe ask him to talk about that with us, any ideas he has from a GDOT perspective, what he's seeing, and also maybe how, if we were able to set up public-private partnership opportunities through CERTA, how that might work to help our truck parking problem. But Commissioner.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I go back to, well, let me rewind. Yes, that has been a reoccurring theme through 2 years now of truck parking, and I'm very encouraged with the national freight plan as the tenets of it came out as Janine just presented. That shows that is an issue that has to be addressed, and certainly will be addressed through the work that the Division of Planning is going to be doing to sort of understand that. There is an interesting role here, and part of the complexity now of, and we get this question often is, why aren't you doing things at your rest areas and welcome centers for private industry, or P3 those? And obviously that's restricted by federal law. Thought that may change. It doesn't look like it is, but I think there's other opportunities to look at either utilization of public property in those strategic areas that were shown on the map, and trying to partner with folks to have again, part of the business strategy of being business friendly is having a place for trucks to be as they stage and as they get that last mile, either coming into the warehouse distribution center. So I think there is a path forward somehow. I think it'd be pretty groundbreaking. And I think that, nationally, this is an issue I know my peers around the nation struggle with as well, is how do you juggle that again? And there seems to be a public-private benefit there as well, because you're trying to serve the good. And believe me, there's many of our friends here in the General Assembly that reach out to us because trucks are on local streets and on city streets and county roads because they have nowhere else to go. And that is a issue that I think once solved or attempt to solve, helps the public good, because their infrastructure is not getting torn up, because often that infrastructure is not designed to carry those heavy loads, or the roads are restricted, or you have a public safety issue there when tractor trailers are on narrow streets and trying to be safe. And as Janine mentioned too, the update to Jason's law is going to be, I think, important, and will drive some national policy decisions as well that look to be encouraging. So I'm encouraged. I think from what we've seen out of 2 years' work now and recommendations, that there are paths forward to try to improve upon the current situation in Georgia strategically and in concert with public-private opportunities.
So I think, would it be a fair statement that from a reporting perspective, Commissioner, if to say that this commission's recommending that GDOT continue to identify the locations throughout Georgia's public road network where there's a need for additional truck parking, and then to work with, hopefully, if we expand again the role of CERTA, to work with CERTA and other state partners to find private partners to help alleviate this problem. So something to that effect. GDOT's identifying where the need is, and that y'all can take a leadership role in attempting to find partners both in the public and private sector to help create a plan for that.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I think that's very fair.
Okay. And then, one of the other the two other big items that that we have spent a lot of time talking about is the need to increase rail infrastructure and the need to increase overall heavy infrastructure. And we've talked a lot about that at every meeting. One of the things that I think that Chairman Skinner of the subcommittee talked about today is going to be key in that effort. And that's looking at ways to bring in the private investment dollars, because and we'll talk about some ideas for revenue generation at the state level. We're never going to be able to generate enough state revenue to take care of all the cost. We're going to have private investment from our partners in the Class 1 railroads, our short line rail partners, and then private partnerships and building additional road infrastructure. So I think the idea that was brought up by the subcommittee of expanding SRTA, expanding their role is going to be very, very important to our overall concept. And also being able to give them the ability to invest in rail. And I think giving the state the investment to invest state tax dollars in rail is going to be important. And I think we do that by clearly outlining in the law how to identify a public benefit. So I think as we move forward with putting this report together, that's going to be important. And defining, like Chairman Beach said, clearly defining what that infrastructure is, what is freight, making it broad enough to make sure the commissioner's concerns are taken into consideration, but also giving our members in the General Assembly a feeling that these dollars are going to the correct place. One of the things, Chairman Beach and I are going to be having some meetings with the Department of Revenue over the next week or so to talk through some other ideas of state funding. One of the things, and I just want to throw some things out for the commission to think about, but we've heard there's a lot of different ideas out there, a lot of different things being utilized by the federal government, by other states to collect dollars. And I think all of us in the General Assembly realize that raising the motor vehicle fuel tax is not the option to politically to collect additional revenue, but there are other revenue sources. One of the things that the federal government does is they have a harbor trust fund where they put a percentage collection on value of cargo, which the good thing about that is it doesn't just affect one industry. I think that's important. You cannot just charge the trucking industry more dollars and put them at an uncompetitive advantage. But there's some ideas around that, but we've got to explore that in a little bit more detail with the Department of Revenue to fully understand how you capture that. The commissioner's well familiar with, that was talked about at a meeting that tracks truck miles here in Georgia, cargo coming through the state from providers out of state who are not Georgia-based providers. So there's a hybrid model that Chairman Beach and I have met with several folks on that I think that can be implemented here in Georgia, where there can be a considerable amount of revenue collected that can be dedicated to freight. So there's going to be a lot of work that's going to have to go on over the next couple of weeks to really drill down with the Department of Revenue on what that looks like. And we'll be getting some additional information back out to the commission. With that, I want to open it up for just general discussion from the commission members and just see what ideas you have, thoughts you have, concerns you have, just open it up. Representative Rutledge.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just coming in this morning, and I've talked to Commissioner McMurray about this before. I would hope, being in the trucking industry, time is of the essence as usual, and it costs money. And when there's an accident, it shuts down a freeway that we have no control over. And it happened this morning again. I would hope that we could look into who's making those decisions of shutting a freeway down. Is it necessary to shut the freeway down for the length of time that they do? Maybe it is. I'm sure the safety is involved, but I would just hope that who can make that decision, and how can we play a role in, because I don't know with the technology that we're talking about, is insurance driving this to investigate the scene? But what, I mean, I would just hope that we could look at that to see if there's anything that we can do to expedite getting freeways back open.
Commissioner, I know from a law enforcement perspective, anytime you shut down a state highway, you have to notify GDOT. And I also know that in code, we allow for or direct people in law, if they have an accident on certain types of highways, including the interstate, if they're able to do so safely, they're to pull over to the side, and the accident's then investigated on the side of the road instead of in the lane it happened in. How's that decision made to shut the interstate down? Can you elaborate on that?
Yes, sir. And to Representative Rutledge's point is, as long as freeway is shut down, there's a high propensity for secondary crashes in the backup to occur as well. So time is of the essence for many reasons. One, for life safety, for people involved to be responded to, but also to try to get the roadway back open. So the jurisdiction that responds first basically has jurisdiction over the crash scene. So it often is local jurisdiction because of that's who's there. It's closest instead of state patrol. It could be state patrol. If state patrol is the first to respond there, GSP could be in command and control. So they leave the way they operationalize that is sort of who responds first to the crash scene and sets up the control. Our job at DOT through HERO and our CHAMP program is to support those first responders by providing them life safety of trying to control traffic and, stop traffic or detour traffic while they're dealing with the incident at hand. There's been I think again, technology plays a role in our future with drones or unmanned aerial devices that can quickly map. Usually fatalities today was a fatality issue. So they were trying to do crash scene analysis because you can't, it's hard to get back out in the middle of the freeway to reconstruct something in the future. So that takes time. We as GDOT are part with law enforcement and first responders of something called the TIME Task Force, is traffic incident management, and try to educate and work. And as a matter of fact, Georgia has trained more first responders than any other state in trying to quick clearance of roadways. Still, we have issues, right? No doubt about it. So we have to continue to be diligent in that effort to, again, work with our first responders, law enforcement, to have quick clearance. A challenge that we have talked about before, as well as regrettably when there's a fatality, is having a coroner have to come and declare death, somebody dead. And that may be something that we probably need to work on outside of this commission and work maybe with legislature on, is looking at if there's some flexibility there. I'm certainly not an expert in the medical field or that, but we often have challenges of because that coroner has to get to the scene as well, and they're usually backed up in the same traffic that's backed up behind it. So it just adds time. So maybe there's other ways to modernize that, or give somebody beside a coroner, a EMT or a fire rescue person that ability. Those are things to be looked at. But you're right, and it affects commerce. It affects us. I mean, it affects us all. And I will give you a gold star for being a great road warrior and frequent caller of traffic congestion issues. But I mean, it's real. It's real. It is the bottom line is a real effect. And I don't want to quote this statistic, but it's for every minute there's another percentage, and by like 30 minutes, it's like I'm not going to give you the numbers, a high percentage of opportunity that there's other crashes, which then just exacerbates the problem.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other general discussion? When we get ready to close out, I'm going to turn it over to Chairman Beach to close us out. But yes, Commissioner?
You're going to wrap it up. Mr. Chairman, I just want to say thank you for allowing us as Georgia DOT to be a part of this commission as it was constructed over 2 years ago now. I want to thank everybody for the time and energy that's been spent over 2 years across the entire state. And it has been truly helpful for me as in my role, that hopefully translates back to the DOT. And And again, having Janine on board and Matt Markham now in our planning division is, we're on a trajectory that really understands business, I think, for Georgia and the bottom line, and knowing that we're committed to driving Georgia's economy ahead to be the number 1 state to do business for the 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, and so on, year in a row. We don't want to give that up. But I just wanted to commend everybody. I want to commend Brad Skinner again for his energy and time, and he really is a humble guy. He was way too humble standing at the podium there about what all he's done and the contacts he's made to make sure that people know Georgia's competitive. He don't have to do that. He doesn't live in Georgia, but he's reached out and made sure that people know that Georgia's serious about infrastructure investment as it relates to freight and logistics. So thank you, Brad. And Mr. Chairman, I just want to thank you for your time and energy as you come to the end of this calendar year. Certainly bittersweet for me. And I want to thank you for your support of GDOT and for transportation in Georgia. It means a lot. And, I'll just have to double down on calling Senator Beach and Chairman Beach now for a little bit.
Thanks.
Sorry about that. But anyway, I want to thank you again for the opportunity. Thank you for your leadership in transportation and of course, for this important issue of freight and logistics.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Anybody else before we turn it over to Chairman Beach? I'll just say that, I appreciate the leadership of everyone on this commission. We've had a great group of people to spend 2 years with. We will be, like I said, having some additional meetings with Chairman Beach, myself, and the commissioner, the Department of Revenue to really drill down in some great detail on some of these revenue ideas that we'll be getting out electronically to the members of the commission. But I think we're on the right path to come up with a package that we can deliver over to the General Assembly next year that they can move forward with, that could really change the ability for Georgia to do business around freight. And I'll also tell you too, on a housekeeping note, Chelsea said if there's a trash can back there, if you don't mind throwing your trash in it, it sure would make her life a lot easier. And that's right. That's logistics. I want to thank Chelsea and Abby and all the other folks from a staff perspective too for the past 2 years. It's really helped us. There's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes. Seth and Meg and everyone else that's helped put these meetings together. And for the work that they're going to be doing to get a report together. So I appreciate all they do. They go above and beyond to make us all look good. So thank you to them. And thank you for allowing me to serve as your co-chairman for the last 2 years. We look forward to getting a report out that we can turn over to the Speaker and Lieutenant Governor and leadership and get this thing done and continue to move Georgia forward. So with that, I'll turn it over to Chairman Beach.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I just want to echo what pretty much the Commissioner and you've said. I want to thank everybody that presented. I want to thank all the committee members, the commission members that have been part of this commission for the last 2 years. We've made a lot of progress. And as the commissioner said, we went around the state. It opened my eyes to a lot of things. I know when I used to give speeches, for example, I used to always say we were the logistics hub of the Southeast. And now I realize we're the logistics hub of the Eastern Seaboard. So I've grown by having this commission. I do want to let you know that we do plan on having some legislation brought forward. And I want to invite everybody on this commission, when we do pass it, to come to the bill signing in the governor's office. I want to invite you, Mr. Chairman. And I just on a personal note, want to thank Chairman Tanner. I will tell you, when you look at what we've accomplished, and you've been part of House Bill 170, you were very instrumental in the ATL. You and I both worked on that. We've worked on some pretty significant transportation legislation, which I think has been very important for our state, but also set the standard for the nation on some of the things we've done. I always hear Commissioner McMurray talking about how our peers in the Southeast are jealous of what we did on House Bill 170 and what we've done. And so I just want to thank you personally for what you've done. I want to wish you well. We're going to miss you. And then Calvin Smyrie, is Calvin on the call?
Yes, I am.
I want to thank you for all you've done. I didn't see you on the call, but I'd like you to say a few words as we close. But again, thank you all for everything. And I want to wish everybody a Merry Christmas, a happy holiday. We're going to have a vaccine soon, and we're going to be able to get in person more often and get back to somewhat of a normal life. And hopefully our traffic will increase too once we get this vaccine implemented. A lot of people always used to say, well, I wish the traffic would go away. Now I hear people saying, man, I miss the traffic. And I do. I want to have everything getting back to normal. So Representative Smyre, would you mind saying a few words?
Yeah, I did want to say something. I had my hand up as well, and thank you, Chairman Beach and Chairman Tanner. I just want to thank both of you all. I have worked with both of you all on many transportation fronts and transportation issues, and I just wanted to be able to say that as we wrap up our meeting on the Freight Commission. It's been a 2 years of really an experience for me in learning more about our infrastructure throughout our state and what drives our economy. And now I'm more aware of the freight and the ports and how all that's integrated into our transportation system and our transportation hubs around the state. And having a chance to working with GDOT is always a pleasure. So I want to say that to both of you all as chair of the House and Senate and co-chair of this Freight Commission. Just want to thank both of you all for your leadership. And then if I may, on a personal note, Mr. Chair, I'd like to thank Kevin Tanner. Kevin Tanner, I can remember the first time that Speaker Ralston called me in 2015. 5 years has gone by when we started working on transportation bills and then on to ATL and now on the Freight Commission. And I'll never forget talking to the Speaker about Chairman Tanner and him becoming chairman of the committee. And I told him, expressed to him how much I was looking forward to working after I worked with Jay Robertson and now working with Chairman Kevin Tanner. His friendship means a great deal to me. He's a level-headed, pure, good-hearted person and a very learned individual as it comes to transportation. So I just want to say that to you, Chairman Tanner, and appreciate your leadership in this role and all that you've done in the House to uplift Georgia and to make our state a better state to live in, to work in, and to play in. So I just wanted to be able to express that to you publicly. I've told you that privately, but I wanted to express that to you publicly. And during my years of service in the General Assembly, I can truly say you've been a statesman as it relates to your political career. So with that, thank you, Chairman Beach, for allowing me to take a minute. But I want to express that to you, to both of you all as chair, but I want to also say something about my House colleague, Kevin Tanner.
Thank you, Representative Smyre. I often say Representative Smyre has worked more on transportation than any member of the General Assembly not to be on the Transportation Committee, right, Calvin Smyre?
I'm thinking about putting in a request to Speaker Ralston to put me on transportation after all these years.
Well, let me say this, Representative Smyre. One thing you can do for me next session is this is going to be a heavy lift, the recommendations we're going to come out with. And I'm not going to be in the Georgia House to help shepherd this thing through. So it's going to require, like so many other things has, your steady hand for the last decade to really get good transportation legislation through the Georgia General Assembly. So I would love for you to commit to me and to commit to Chairman Beach that you'll continue to do that and continue to help us get this legislation to the governor's desk.
I said publicly, you got it.
That's what I was looking for on tape recorded. All right. Well, thank you very much. If there's nothing else, we stand adjourned.